Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Christina, for that great introduction. We appreciate it. We are live at this time. We have both our virtual attendees participating in today's call. As a reminder, this call is being recorded and will be posted shortly within the next few business days for those colleagues who are not able to attend. Also, we do have a virtual group of people attending, and they also are available to be seen during the Interheller transparency view. You can actually refresh that periodically, and you'll be able to see the most up-to-date list. During this call, we definitely encourage both in-person and virtual participation. To do in person, my colleague Christina will be helping on-site support for those who like to use the mic on the desktop. And also for those virtual attendees, you'll be able to use the raise hand located in the middle of your screen. When you are asked a question, you're able to provide your full name affiliation. If to do so, that will be really great appreciated. We also want to make sure if there's any questions submitted through chat, feel free to provide your affiliation as well. At this time, we are starting a little early, and that will allow us to give us a little folks more time to join us. We are anticipating a turnout about 60 attendees on the virtual line, and you'll be able to see those as well. And then our event producer is Stacy, so she'll be helping us out during the call as well. We did show the agenda on the last slide. The last slide shows a few breakdown of the presentations that will be provided during the call. We also have PGE Jeff Power who will be joining us with Gina's presentation. So he'll be participating as well remotely. So you'll see him on the virtual platform. And also those slides, we are planning to have those posted by before noon, maybe earlier. We have just submitted those to approval, so you'll see those as you walk through with our meeting today. But at this time, I do want to go ahead and introduce Andrew Brown, who's at the podium, and go ahead, Andrew, kick things off for our forum today. Thank you so much.
All right. Can everybody hear me all right? Doing good. Okay. Slide that up a little bit. Okay. Appreciate everybody coming here today, attending virtually or in person. So we are through a bunch of that stuff. So I'm going to start off by talking about our modeling and associated data exchange processes. So basically, this is just going to be an overview of the modeling process that we use for the Western interconnection model, and then how that modeling information is utilized in our systems in order to operate the markets, and then it provides feedback to the individual entities that are submitting that information. So go ahead and get started here. So introduction, like I said, is the modeling in the full network model, and that model is used for the RC, the WEIM, and then also the California ISO. We'll talk about where the model has impacts and then why it has impacts in those locations. We'll also talk about the model submission timing and then the required modeling submittals. And then we'll follow up with following the model, basically just going through the communications that we have on needs for the scheduling, the WebOMS, doing validation when the model goes into production, and then also implementing the generators for market readiness. So once the model goes into production, what activities need to be taken place at that time. So just some background on this. The collective footprints in the Western interconnection are increasing in size at a very accelerated pace. I'm sure all of you are feeling this, where you have a number of new transmission projects, resources, just a lot of change coming at a very rapid pace. And because of that change, it's requiring more model management and then also coordination. So one of the things that we are hoping to encourage during this presentation is planning for assets. So making sure that you have the opportunity to look ahead in your planning process and figure out where the model submissions need to be submitted, and then how you might need to work within your own organization on those timelines. So we'll talk through some of that. And then we'll talk about how those resources get modeled in both models. So within the Western interconnection model, but then also within your own balancing area model. and then how you might need to coordinate with developers and project teams in order to ensure that your modeling submissions are going to be submitted in time for production into the Western Interconnection Model and inclusion into the WEIM market. And then finally, we'll talk about operational preparedness for both the transmission and generation. So that's just managing the model builds to the energization, making sure that teams are aware of what is occurring and when throughout the entire process. So from essentially the start of the modeling process all the way to the resource coming online for first energization. So just to kind of talk through some of these items. So our teams maintain both a physical model of the Western interconnection, and so that is done through the Western Interconnection Modeling. We call it the WIM. And so basically that is the baseline topology of the modeling that's used. So that is your wires, your generators, cap banks, those types of things. So those are the base of that Western Interconnection Modeling. On top of that is an additional layer, the full network model, that would have your generator parameters, market calculations, or it has the generator parameters and then is used for market calculations, the power flow studies, and then real-time monitoring. So all those items together we can kind of refer to as the full network model, but both are important in order for the system to operate. So the model and its supporting information is leveraged in different systems in both the WEIM and RC West. And so that Western Interconnection Model is used for both services. And part of that real-time assessment includes the market and then real-time state estimator, contingency analysis, also used in HANA, EMS. And then it's also used for look-ahead analysis. So that would be, in the future, that would be EDAM, the day-ahead market, and then our next day studies, and then also for operational planning. Also utilized by WebOMS for outages. So that would include like if you have temporary equipment rating changes, modeling between model cycles, those types of things is utilized in WebOMS. And then also our BSA RC or base schedules. So that's for resource and load modeling. And then it also supports future analysis. So you can see that the model is used all over the place within the different services that are provided from RC to the market, but then also forward-looking for our outage coordination and those types of things. So critical that the modeling is submitted in a timely manner and is accurate. So we'll talk a little bit about the model management process. So this is kind of a continuous cycle. So as we start building one model, we are collecting the documents for the next model, and then that cycle kind of continues on. So this will just be a once through kind of view that we do right here. And so basically a balancing area or a TOP identifies some changes that need to be submitted for a certain model timeline. They'll communicate those changes via the scope document and the supporting files into RIMS. One thing that we want to bring up is that those files will need to be reviewed and accepted by the customer acceptance deadline. And occasionally our NetApps team or EMS team, they may reach out with questions, and it's really important that we get timely responses back on those questions. Sometimes it's urgent depending on at what point the modeling information was submitted. If you submit just a few days before the deadline, that becomes a lot more urgent to get those clarifications back in the case that we have. We want to make sure we have clear understanding of what is intended to be modeled. So the ISO will then review those changes, and then if they have any concerns, they'll reach out, and then if they're accepted, then you would be assigned a model build. Once that model build has been assigned, the balancing area can validate what items have all been accepted by looking at our published scope, and so that is published on the ISO website. It's also in RIMS. You can see it'll say that the model build has been assigned, and then it will tell you which model build is assigned for. So during that time, our NetApps and EMS teams are working to update the model with those changes. And then 1 week prior to the production deployment date, the BA or TOP would be expected, generally the TOP would be expected to submit items that would cover any transmission topology changes that are needed for OMS. So making those updates into the system so that when the model deploys, those outages are in place if that equipment is not ready to energize in the date the model deploys. So once the model deploys, it goes into the production system. And then at that point, the BA and TOP would be able to validate those models using the published model files that are on the RC portal or other areas. And we will cover that in more detail later on here. But WEIM generation at that point can then move forward in the NRI process for their market setup, submitting their market documents, completing their SCME requirements. So, but like I said, we're going to go through this process in a little bit more detail here of what steps happen at each stage. So one of the first things that needs to be done is we need to determine which submission date we're going to be using based on the model implementation schedule. And so looking through the full network model schedule that we have here, we have these FNM labels that are in that first column, and the FNM labels refer to the month that the model will deploy in. So that's the 26M2, that's 2026 month 2. And then the next item is the DB label. And so we're at DB 139 coming up in 2026 month 2. The next column over is the customer model document acceptance deadline. And that is the date that all of the documents need to be accepted in RIMS in order for the resource to be included in that model build. We also have the ISO published final scope. That is the date that the ISO will publish the scope of that model build, basically showing all of the projects that are going to be included within that model build. The next item over is the late model scope change request deadline. Really want to emphasize the request portion. It is not a guarantee that your late scope request will be accepted. It's becoming more and more difficult to complete the modeling items that have been submitted on time. And so adding in late scopes later on increase the urgency of work that needs to be done and can sometimes result in delays to the deployment of the model. And that becomes a huge issue because, as we said, this is the Western interconnection model, which covers a vast number of BAs. And so delaying the deployment of the model would then delay some of the items that those other BAs and TOPs are doing, which in some cases could impact reliability. And so those late scope requests are just that. They are a request, and they may or may not be able to be accommodated. So it's really important, and one of the reasons why we're stressing so much that the modeling information has to be submitted on time and in a complete manner so that there's a full understanding of what needs to be modeled in that timeline. So the next item we have is a production deployment date. So this is the week that the ISO and RC West plan to deploy the model into the production environment. Generally, that occurs on a Wednesday. So if you're looking through this, you can see that we have like the week of 2/9, the week of 4/13. So that 2/9 is a Monday. Generally, the model deploys on a Wednesday. So the actual deployment date will be 2/11. And for most like transmission or generator-based topology, that's it's not critical that you know that date, that exact date. But when you get into like the market documents for the WEIM, it becomes more important because of adding that full network model layer on top of the base topology in the Western interconnection model. Those timings become more critical. And we will talk about that a little bit more later on today. So just for information, the model schedule can be found on both the RC portal and then the westerneim.com website. So both locations, you can find that that full network model schedule. So we'll run through a quick example. Oh, I dropped it all in there. Okay, well, this was supposed to step through. But so for the example, so we're going to look at to identify a target production date. And so for this, it's new equipment that's being submitted in advance of the energization date. And essentially, we're going to look at what the first test energy date or first in-service date might be, whichever term your organization uses. But essentially, it's the date that you're going to connect the resource to the grid, and it may be injecting energy or consuming energy. So that would be the date you would want to target as having the resource included in the model. Some entities might want to, or might be more used to like, well, we just want to have it in by the COD date. And the one thing I'll caution with that is that if the resource is producing test energy or consuming energy, if it's a battery, that can distort the market. And so the market needs to accommodate for that, either injection or consumption on the grid. And so that's where it's important that it's included in the model before that first energization date. So in this case, we have BA, AAA is adding a new generator to their system. The earliest date the equipment will start test energy is going to be March 22nd of 2026. And so in this case, based on the production deployment date, which model build would be best? From here, you can see that we've selected 26 month 2. And the reason we selected that is if we were to put it in the 26 month 4, that won't deploy until the week of April 13th, which is after March 22nd. So that date doesn't work. So the next closest model build that we could use would be that 26 month 2, which has a deployment date of February 9th. And so for our modeling purposes, that would be the model build that we would want to use for. And so then stepping through the next items, so our completed documentation needs to be accepted by what date? And that becomes November 19th of 2025. And then the ISO will publish a final scope where we can check to confirm that the resource was included in that model build, and that would be published on December 10th, 2025. So kind of a quick example there. So now we'll move over to the next example that we have here. And this example too, we have is more of like a model planning approach. So this would be, we have a bunch of projects. We're going to start grouping them together to figure out which model build all of these projects we need to be included in. And so we're looking from essentially in July of 2026, these projects that we have coming online. And then we're also going to scan for anything that's after the week of June 15th, but before the week of August 10th. And so you can see from this example, we're going to be targeting the 26 month 6 model build. And again, if you look at that production deployment column, you can see that anything that's in July, there isn't a model build in July. So we would want to have all of those resources that are going to be energizing in July in the June model build. So that would mean our documents have to be accepted by March 25th. And then the final scope will be published on 4/15. And we can see that the deployment will then be the week of 6/15. And if I take into account that's a Monday and the model normally deploys on a Wednesday, so then we can see that 6/17 would probably be the actual deployment date. So going through that example. So, all right. So we've talked about like the schedules and when items need to be submitted. The next thing we'll talk about is what needs to actually be submitted. And so one of these items, what is a network model scope document? And so this is like the foundational document that we use to communicate what the changes are in like plain language. And so SIM files, not everybody has the ability to open a SIM file and run a compare to what the previous model was. And so the next best thing that we have is this network model scope template. And this should communicate what the change is. It should also provide a timeline within the model scope and then based on the model build of when the equipment is going to be energized. And this can be leveraged by both our modelers and then also our operations team. So we also put together a release notes for the model that we share with our operations group, essentially by using that full network model scope. So the same document that's published. Externally, we also create for our internal operations for RC West a scope that shows all of the items that have changed. And there's a lot of them in the majority of the modeling that is done by our NetApps and EMS team now are for the Western Interconnection, not the KISO BA. So one of the things with the description is that we want a relatively clear explanation of what is changing within the model build, realizing that it's not has to be inclusive of everything. You don't have to tell us every single switch that's changing, but major items should be included in there. And so then this network template will also list the associated files that support the change. And then all of those files should be uploaded to RIMS with a network scope document. Any file that's uploaded needs to have a network scope document included. So you don't need to upload a network scope document for every file, but if you upload a file, it should have a network scope document that is explaining what the purpose of the file is, where it'll be used at. And so what should you put in there as far as what should you be calling out? And so the addition or deletion of any generator should be included. You should also have any additions or deletions of equipment that's 230 kV and above. So if you're adding substation, transmission line, those items should be in there. And then if you have equipment rating changes, so those would be any RAS updates, contingency definition changes, or additions, those types of items, we would greatly appreciate if you would call out individually. Like I said, if you're renaming a bunch of switches, it's not as imperative that you list out every single switch that's being changed. So, so the network scope template, so again, trying to get that this is a way to communicate this information in plain English. And so again, this is just a recap of the previous slide. And then down at the bottom, we have the short descriptions, specifications. So if you're submitting a transmission line or a shunt capacitor transformer, those types of things, of what kind of a description would be useful for that item. And then some examples of what you should put in for the plain language. So if you're adding a new substation for a new generator, the example language that can be used is added, XXX solar generator to XYZ 230 kV substation. All that is included in a generator. And so that would be if you have schedules, synchronous machines, resource controller, associated breaker, all of those types of things in there. One thing that's also handy is making sure that the resource ID that you use in the model is the same resource that will be used to associate the generator in the WEIM document registration. If those don't match, there isn't a way for us to do that link between the master file documents that are uploaded later in the process and the information that was uploaded in the Western Interconnection modeling process. Next items like the transmission line, again, there's an example there of what kind of information we would be looking for. And again, it's clear that you're using plain English so that we can understand what change needs to be included. If you just have a single line that says July updates, we've found that that can lead to some major problems because you might have a 230 line that for some reason got deleted and then was not added in. And if that's the SIM file that comes to our NetApps team where there's a 230 line that's being removed, if there's no other real communications on there, they might start heading down the road of deleting that 230 line. So just something to keep in mind that when we don't have complete information based on the volume of modeling that needs to be done, it's very difficult for our team to reach out in a timely manner to every project. That's where we're really looking for partnership on the front end of having clear instructions for what needs to be modeled, what needs to be changed. So again, if you haven't noticed, we're really asking for help on the network model scope templates. And that's because just of the sheer volume of modeling that needs to be done, making sure that we have clear instructions. And so part of this, all the physical equipment should be provided in the project. And then you don't need to submit a new scope item for every element, but just to give like an overall overview of what the project is. So in this case, you wouldn't need to say like we're adding a breaker and a transformer and have separate line items for each one. You could just say we're adding a substation with a new generator that's bisecting these transmission lines. So those types of callouts are extremely helpful for us. The other thing is the effective date of the change. So that's the date the change should be effective, also known as the in-service date. We're not looking for you to put in the production deployment date of the model. We're looking for the date that the resource is going to energize. That becomes helpful for our RC West operations and our market operations so that they can see if a generator or a transmission line is going to be energized. They have an idea of what date that line or resource is going to be energized. So that's where that effective date is extremely helpful for us. And then adding in the requested model build for the change to be included in. So the model build, again, helps. Sometimes people will just put the first available model build, which can sometimes be confusing because we don't know, well, was this like some kind of an emergency and that, whatever that piece of equipment is was already put into service. And so this is already energized. That's where if every piece of equipment has a date like in the past, it makes us nervous because then it's like, okay, is all this equipment already energized and we have incorrect information in our model currently? So working with us on those items is extremely important. And that's, again, something you could add into when you're doing your network scope. You could put in like this was an emergency install or like equipment failed and we had to replace it. We recognize that those types of things happen and that not everything can be submitted in advance, but as much stuff as can be submitted in advance, we'd really appreciate. Next item, so using the modeling submission checklist. So sometimes it comes up, well, what information do I need to submit and where can I find that? So within RIMS, there is the modeling submission checklist that's located on the RC dashboard. Within that file, the modeling submission checklist, there's also a WEIM tab for new resources, which is a checklist of all of the required documentation for either a participating or a non-participating resource. The modeling submission checklist is available on the RC dashboard within RIMS. It's also available on the Western EIM website under the resources tab. So you can find that document there as well if you don't have access to the RC dashboard. So one of the other items that is becoming a very hot topic with everyone is ICCP submissions, and we're going to talk in more detail later on about that. But one of the items is that some entities have described difficulty in having a complete list of what the ICCP object IDs will be by the full network model timeline. And so placeholders can be used. The one thing that we want to stress is that if the ICCP is not submitted at the time of modeling, then our NetApps team doesn't create a node for that ICCP to attach to in the model topology. And so without that node in the model topology, the ICCP can't be added later. But if that node is in place, we can do a mid-model update where we're just updating the ICCP object ID. So as long as that node is created, there's an opportunity to still update the ICCP with like an actual name in the case that the object ID changes. So we want to be really clear on calling out that. And if you are submitting placeholders, it might be good for you to like note that it's a placeholder. And one of the items that ends up is if you get to later on in the production deployment process and we have ICCP that's not active, then there'll end up being a follow-up on that as well, where we'll follow up to determine why that object ID isn't active. So telemetry has become kind of a real issue and a struggle, just with the volume of new equipment coming into the model, and then making sure that we have accurate visibility into what's actually occurring in the field. So this is kind of for the different submissions that we're looking for. So like the breaker and disconnect status, megawatt, megavar, and that should be included for both the parent and child if it's an aggregate or an MSG. And then for specific fuel types, they may need additional ICCP. And so we're in the process of creating both a template and then a checklist that's a little bit easier to see exactly what's required. So in this case, we have for batteries, the state of charge, basically what the resource availability is. And then if it's a variable energy resource hybrid, we would need that MET data, and then also the high sustainability limit, and then a renewable forecast. If it's a solar, wind, a variable energy resource, and you're requesting an ISO forecast, we would need that real-time MET data. And this would only be for standalone resources. And then in order to make this a little bit easier to do, we came up with this table that you can kind of look through to see which ICCP is required for which resource. We'll be publishing this very shortly. And then you'll notice there's a bunch of notes in there, and this is the notes for that table. So you can see what is listed in there. There's some qualifiers for when the information is required versus when it's not required. So again, we'll be publishing this on the Western EIM webpage. All right. So for generation, when you're modeling generation, some of the best practices. So that's encouraging the coordination within your own entity. So whatever's submitted in the Western interconnection model, to make sure that that is going to match what's submitted in the GRDT and the SC letters. So that would be the scheduling coordinator, resource ID, that kind of baseline information. And then one of the other items that we've seen from time to time is where the PMAX capacity that's listed in the Western interconnection model is lower than what's listed in the GRDT. So if you think about, the modeling should be the max limits. So those are like the extremes that the resource can operate at. And then you can utilize the GRDT to kind of fine tune where the most either economical or comfortable ratings limits are for the operator. So the Western interconnection model would be the guardrails that keep the GRDT from being outside of the resource's operational limitations. So the available capacity, like we said, you can manage that through the GRDT and then also through WebOMS. But those are going to, again, refer back to whatever is in the Western interconnection model as the max and min limits. So it's good to make sure to coordinate with the transmission modeling team to ensure that the generator's point of interconnection and the related transmission is modeled. Occasionally we have where a resource comes in and there's no transmission submitted to it. So they end up with kind of a floating resource out there. The single line drawings that are included for the resource, those should show like the connection of the generator, ideally with like the switches labeled and the switches with the correct default switch status, so that if they're normally open or normally closed, those are listed in there, and then accurate ratings. And so all of this is used in the market. If the switch is a normal open, when we're doing like the day ahead market run, even if there's ICCP that shows the switch is closed, that normal position is what is generally used in the day ahead run. And also in our other longer term studies, we'll use those default statuses. So for transmission, we'll just kind of cover this really quick. So basically the contingency definitions for what is going to open for a contingency, making sure that those are included, having facility ratings, if you have EREC cards for the incorrect or temperature ratings would be good. And then again, like the default switch positions. So even like I mentioned, even if they have ICCP, and default switch position is what will be used for the forward-looking processes that we run. And then if there's any pseudo switches or double modeling, making sure that those switches are in the correct position. Again, those can lead to errors when looking through like either RTCA or market results. It'll show that the resource is not connected because the default switch status was open. So it made it look like the resource was offline. So, and then providing the ICCP list with the model build timeline. So again, even if they're placeholders, just making sure that you have those ICCP points included. And then including the communication if there's new or major equipment, making sure that that's also listed in there. And again, we need looking for coordination between the transmission modeling as needed for the generation. And so basically, whoever might manage your RC versus your WEIM activities. So we've gone through and submitted all of our documents, and now we want to check to see if they have been accepted or not. And so within here, you can see there's a status, which essentially will allow you to view the status. It should show if it's completed, approved for modeling, rejected. You may also see updates or notes in this project column, and that could be if it might say like need a, need a scope template or something like that. And then there's a the entity column, which that correlates to the entity ID that uploaded the files. And then to the right of that, there's also a upload status, and that should indicate if it was successful or not in uploading. So that's up on the top section there, the reliability coordinator dashboard. If you were to scroll down a little bit on that page, you'll see a project details page, and that will essentially provide a little bit of information on what was actually modeled. That's what gets pulled out of the network scope template. So the top section is essentially the network scope template and then the supporting documentation that was uploaded. The bottom section is the individual items that were pulled out of the scope template. So the more detail you put in the scope template, the more projects you'll have listed on the bottom, which that then will carry into what you would see on the final scope that's published. So the target date that we use in the DB label is what the user submitted for the targeted model build. And then the DB model is what we will assign to show that that particular project detail item was actually included in a model or assigned to a model scope. One just quick kind of passing thing is that this reliability coordinator dashboard will be changing in the near future to the Western interconnection model dashboard to more closely align with the purpose that it's used, not just for RC purposes, but for both WEIM and EDAM modeling as well. So just a quick recap of what you might see in those updates and statuses and RIMs. So when you're looking at that status, it will show that it's reviewed, that it's approved for modeling, that it's completed, it was implemented into the production model, and then there might be need more info. This could be RC West or the WEIM requesting more information. And so normally when that happens, you will get an automated message that is sent to the user who uploaded the document, asking them for more information. And then the other item is rejected. And again, this will be an auto-generated message that is sent to the user who uploaded the item. And so those are some ways to find out the status of your document submissions, if they were accepted or not. So moving through our timeline here, we've uploaded our documents, we've gone through, everything was approved. It's now being modeled. So here, 1 week prior to the model being implemented or deployed, these are some activities that will need to be occur, assuming that this equipment is not changing over with the model build. So if your equipment is going live at midnight on the date the model is going into production, then you wouldn't have to do anything. Unlikely that that will happen though. So in most cases, you'll need to work with your teams to insert WebOMS cards. And so for new generation, the TOP can submit an OMS card to show the resource is disconnected from the system. After the model's deployed and the SC association has occurred, then the scheduling coordinator can submit an OMS card to place the resource in outage. But we realize there's a gap normally between when the model deploys to when the resource, the scheduling coordinator for the resource will have availability to enter in an OMS card. So that is the general way to handle that. If you have any double modeling, inserting those cards to reflect what the conditions are in the field. And then if you have new lines, showing those lines out of service until they're going to be energized. And then if you have any temporary normal or emergency ratings, in this case, lines getting a new rating, you can add that in. So. Right. For WebOMS, this is just an example for new equipment energization. So one of the items we have with these slides is trying to make it so that they're useful, not just while I'm talking, but you'd be able to refer back to these later on and make sense of this. So this is an example of what we would expect in an OMS card, essentially showing the project's implementation date, the production deployment date, and then the next FNM production. So this basically just shows, like, for the RIMS outage card, the start date would be the full network model deployment production date when the model is coming into production. And then the end date would be the date that the resource is going to energize. So in this case, we can see that the resource is energizing March 1st. And so we show that that end date is going to be March 1st. That's when the resource is going to energize at 8 a.m. And then the notice of work is just a RIMS outage. And then for modeling, the outage card modeling will include switches, breakers, open or closed, depending on the type of the status they're going to be kept in. So that's an example that can be referred back to. All right. So one of the items that we've kind of talked about is where all of this information is utilized by, where it gets leveraged in all of these different processes. And so inaccuracies in the model can impact a lot of different places. So we have the real-time and look-ahead visibility. We have the ICCP object IDs or a lack thereof. You have the normal breaker position if they're incorrect, or the default switch positions. And then we have generator resource characteristics that could be incorrect. And then topology that might be incorrect, and then like facility ratings that could be incorrect. And if you just kind of take each one of those and think through what impact that could have on either your operations or the market running, and what those impacts can be, you can kind of see how quickly things can start to spiral, and you start to set off this chain reaction of issues that impact a number of different areas. So making sure that the model is correct is extremely important. So part of that next step is it's in production. So how do I verify to make sure that it's correct? And so if you are in RC West and you have access to the RC portal, there is the Western interconnection model gets published for RC West users. And so you can go to the library and pull up the model, and then also the ICCP points. And if you are looking through there, there's a number of them. You'll want to search by the DB model. And so again, if you go back to that full network model schedule, it had the month like 26M2, and then would also have the DB label, so DB 140. And so you can search through the different model by looking there on the library page of the RC portal. If you don't have access to the RC portal, then all RC and WEIM-BA users can look in WebOMS. So once that is updated, you can check to see what equipment has been implemented, what the naming is, the ratings. RC users would have HANA, has the default facility ratings, and then HANA subscribers will have additional information that they can look through. If you're a WEIM-BA entity only, you could also utilize the market displays to validate that transmission modeling. And then you can also use the SVG1 lines. So just a couple locations where you can verify the modeling that's been put into production. So another item is energization and test energy. So For test energy, the market will see this from a line flow perspective, which could contribute to congestion. So even if you don't have the resource, or you're like, well, it's just test energy, so we're not going to include it in the model, it's still contributing to market conditions and real world congestion. So there is a job aid on the WEIM portal that kind of goes through the management of resource testing. And if you have a new large generator or transmission line, which could impact the significantly impact flows, notifying the RTMO of those prior to energization is also extremely helpful. Some other things to keep in mind with the model management perspective, any WebOMS cards for both generation and transmission can impact effective dating or flow calculations. So making sure to keep those up to date. And then if you have any ICCP updates, those items should be submitted at least 2 weeks prior to energization. So like we said before, if you're utilizing some kind of a temporary object ID because of constraints on your side, then we would ask that those ICCP updates be submitted 2 weeks prior to energization. And then to also make sure that there's access to the ICCP. We've had that a few times in the past as well, where a company hasn't shared those ICCP object IDs with RC West, and that leads to issues as well. So I have been talking for quite a while. We'll check and see if there are any questions.
First, we'll go to questions in the room. Does anyone in the room have a question? Feel free to raise your hand, or you can prop up your name placard as well. Not seeing any questions in the room. Brenda, do you see any questions online?
Just confirming with my team to make sure if the question we received, we'll go ahead and read it out loud from Tucson Electric Power. They asked about a question about the need of more information of a rejected message that goes into email distribution for company and group. And I think one of my team members will be covering that in their next presentation. So we'll be replying to that in the presentation. Thank you.
I think we can take the question now.
So that's an enhancement in RIMS that we're currently working on to change it so that it would go to different users. The difficulty is with the way that the organizations are built. So depending on whether the person who submits it, the entity that they submit it under is like the the entity name _ BA or the entity name _ TOP. Making sure that it gets sent to the correct people. So previously we had an issue where we weren't able to correctly link those organizations together. And so now we've fixed that overarching issue. And so now we need to update the actual code within RIMS in order to make that. But it is on our list of enhancements to make. So it's something that we're working on, and we'll be talking a little bit later here about opportunities for improvement within RIMS. So appreciate that question. It is an item that we're working on updating.
We do have one question in the queue. Danny, go ahead. Please introduce yourself and the slide number if you like.
Hello, everybody. I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Yep.
Sweet. Hi, everybody. I'm Danny Zemensky. I work for Salt River Project in Arizona. I help lead some of our teams to bring on resources. First and foremost, I just want to say Andrew and his team have rocked, have really been helping us throughout the years. This presentation is doing really good so far. And I just wanted to check one thing. When you mentioned having all the submittals for the documentation stuff that goes off of the WEIM checklist, that's different than the NRI checklist items, which I believe might be in the meeting tomorrow.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of the reasons we had this forum first is just because I think there gets to be so much emphasis on the CAISO BA processes. So we wanted to have this, the WEIM first, so that we could kind of talk through all of the differences, because the documentation is located in a different area. And so we're going to be making a very clear and intentional change to try to move all of the documentation that will be needed for the WEIM onto that Western EIM webpage, so that you can find the required documents that need to be submitted in one location.
But just for clarification, Andrew will be going more into the market documents for new resources for EIM later in the day.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah, I see a lot of overlapping. There's just a couple of different bucket items. And my question was more in the line of with having them all in before that full network model deadline submittal date. Because I've seen in the past where they kind of trickle in, and maybe that's where it falls into the date when, Andrew, you were mentioning about the last possible request date on the full network model schedule. So we just need to dial that in on our side.
Yep. Yeah, the next, not the next presentation, but the presentation after will go through the timelines for submitting the documentation, the market documentation. So there's essentially the three. You have the modeling, the metering, and the market documents. And so the modeling has to go in first, then the metering, and then the market documents. So we'll cover the timelines for the market documents, and partly it's generally, we found that it's separate groups within the entities that are actually submitting these different document bundles. And so we're trying to provide like an overall coordination, which we'll kind of cover in the next, the next presentation I do, which won't be the next presentation. But yeah, we will cover it. So if you have questions after that presentation, love to hear them, Danny.
Ed, thank you. And we're not seeing, oh, we have a question in the room from Pat McCarthy.
Yeah, easy. Hi, Pat McCarthy, Artisan Grid Services. Easy technical question for you. I noticed, and this is actually learning for me. So I just learned that you really only worry about 230 kV and above, and kV and above from a physical network characteristic perspective. What are the spec on the generators adding and deleting for WEIM that are maybe different from normal KISO?
Yeah, so again, this presentation is geared towards WEIM and RC. And so from an RC perspective, it's generally 230 and above is what we're really concerned about. For the generators, yeah, and Gina's, the operators are like, well, but not always. Yeah, so depending on if it's an area that might have like a lot of congestion or something, then they'll be more concerned, and it might be down to like, you know, a 115 or lower that they're concerned about if it has a lot of congestion in that area. So it really depends. As a general guideline, absolutely anything 230 and above needs to be called out. If it's an area of like special interest where there's a lot of congestion or something, then you would want to call out any changes there. And so that could be like generation. So if you have an area with a lot of congestion and you're adding generation there, then you'd also want to call that out. So it's highly dependent. In a lot of cases, we count on the whoever the BA or TOP is that is submitting it, that they know their system, so they know areas that should be called out.
Okay, and then just from a MVA sizing perspective, there is not a hard rule either, probably.
So I think I just want to make some clarification. So I think if we're talking about the scope document, and I mean, in general, the MVA, there is no like hard rule. But for the scope document, what we're trying to do is highlight impactful things to the grid, right? So things that could impact the way we're taking actions or need more visibility. So from a WEIM perspective, you know, we really want any generator, right? Because the purpose of WEIM is balancing generation or dispatching generation, you know, across the West. For RC purposes, you know, in the scope document, we're trying to identify things that could change the way we view the reliability view, right? So physical model, if there could be a change, and it's kind of similar, right? Any generator is probably going to have an impact. There's not really a megawatt value to say. Now, will we put more focus on ones that are like over 100 megawatts or something major because it's going to be more impactful to the system? You know, we probably want to highlight those. Generally, though, I will say as a whole, in terms of reporting, we need to remember for reliability coordinator purposes, anything in the BES, so typically greater than 100 kV, or anything that's less than 100 kV and impacting your greater transmission grid. Those are all reportable things that need to be in the physical model. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Gina. Any other questions?
I'm not seeing any other questions in the room or online. Did you have any final?
Nope, that is it.
Next, we'll be hearing, well, did we want to take a break? We'll continue with the presentation. We'll take a break later on. We'll be hearing from Priyanka Namburi next about WEIM scheduling coordinator meter entity.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. So I'll be talking about the SCME projects in RIMS for the WIM entities. We also have this option for the CAISO BA entities who choose the SCME option. For them, the option is already available. And we also have a CBT posted for the CAISO BA entities. So very soon, we will be switching our WEIM entities SCME process from NRI to RIMS. So all these years, all the WM entities during onboarding and also later on when they added new resources, they have used the NRI process and submitted the metering documents directly to NRI. Going forward, we'll be using RIMS, where the required metering documents will be uploaded to RIMS. Okay, so unlike emailing documents to NRI, for RIMS, you would need access to RIMS, and then only you can submit the documents. To get access to RIMS, the entity must have an EIM contract with ISO. And once the EIM contract is established, then we also need a RIMS contract. And at that time, RIMS access will be provisioned, and the entity or the employers in the entity will get access to RIMS, where they can create the RIMS projects and submit the documents. So as I mentioned, the EIM contracts is the first step. And once the EIM contract is established, then your onboarding specialist will have to follow the instructions on the user access agreement form, and then establish the UAA access, and they can provide RIMS access. And for this process, we have several documents uploaded in our UAA webpage, as well as the AIM user guide will guide you through the process. And some scenarios. So if the EIM contract is not complete, then you will not get access to RIMS. And for the existing WIM entities, where you are adding new resources later on, then if the UAA certificate has expired, then you can reach out to uaarequest@kaiso.com to renew that certificate, or in case the UAA has left the company and you don't have an active UAA, in those cases also you can reach out to uaarequest@kaiso.com to again establish a UAA for your entity. Okay, RIMS. So RIMS is where you will be uploading your documents and where you will be seeing the status of your project and the documents. So we have a RIMS user guide that is posted on our public website. So for all the WM entities, most of you are not familiar with RIMS because you have been submitting the documents using the NRI process. So we highly encourage you to look into RIMS user guide and review it before you start creating the RIMS projects or getting ready to submit any metering documents. And yeah, so you can, once you get access to RIMS, so you can upload the documents and you can see the contact information for your projects, and also you will receive the updates. This is similar to the updates that you received today as part of the NRI process. So you will get updates about whether your documents have been accepted or whether they have not accepted, and in that case, what was the reason for not acceptance. So once you get access to RIMS, so in the RIMS, under the Reliability Coordinator tab, you will see SCME dashboard and SCME project bulk upload. So this is where you will see your SCME projects or you can create an SCME project. So you would go to SCME project bulk upload. So some of you have used the bulk upload in the past for creating multiple projects. So in this case, even to open a single project or for multiple projects, you will be using the SCME bulk upload. So then, yeah, once you go into RIMS, you'll be able to download it. So download the bulk template, and then you would fill out the bulk template. The fields in the bulk template are same as the ones that are in project details form. So we still require the same information for SCME projects. So here's a snapshot of the bulk template. So after you download, you would enter all the project information and your NRI contact information and some EMS information. Please keep a note that the tab for the spreadsheet has to be renamed to the SCID. That gets validated. So please ensure that you have the right SCID available and you rename the tab to the SCID. Some helpful tips. So check the latest version. We don't recommend you to download the documents from the RIMS and use the same documents for every project. So right before creating a project or uploading a particular document at that time, download it so you always have the latest version, because from time to time we do update the documents. So always use the latest spreadsheet, and all the required fields are needed. So we have auto validations in place. So if any of the required fields are not filled out, then you will immediately get a rejection or an error message. And versions, so whenever you are submitting another version of a single line drawing or an SQMD template, make sure to version those documents. And the project names, the name of the project should be unique. And if you have any questions on the bulk upload template, please reach out to nri@kaiso.com. Okay, some more fields on the template. We need a project name. Like I just mentioned, it has to be unique. And the resource ID. So this resource ID have to match exactly same as in your GRDT and SC letters and also on your SQMD plan. The implementation date is when this particular resource will be energized or will be providing energy to the grid. Then net output and point of interconnection where it is connected and the connection voltage. So all these fields need to be filled out for the project creation. NRI contact information. So again, the project contact name and phone number. So this will be the person who is creating the project. And authorized contacts, these are the people who will be submitting the documents. So earlier question when Andrew was presenting was, when people are out of office or staffing change, so we highly recommend you to provide multiple email addresses here. So these are all the people who will get updates on the project, and also they'll be able to submit the documents. So please provide multiple emails on whoever should have that ability to submit the documents. And then we need some EMS information, and this information goes directly to our master file. The latitude information and the longitude information, it should be in the decimals degree format, and the nearest substation. And if it is load resource, especially ELAP, you can enter 0 for latitude and longitude. Okay, once you filled out all that required information on the bulk template, you are now ready to upload it. You would go back to RIMS and then you would upload that document. So this is the RIMS view where you will see all your project status and required documents and the bucket notes and everything. So you can also review NRI checklist to know what documents are required, and also the NRI guide has a quick reference for the file naming convention. So similar to the file names that you have used in the NRI process, the documents have to follow a specific file name. So please refer to these guides and submit the documents with the correct file naming convention. So in RIMS, yeah, you can, it's pretty much self-explanatory. RIMS is a very user-friendly tool. So you can choose a file and then upload that file, and then you will see the status whether the file has been successfully uploaded or not. If you see any error or pending message, then you can reach out to NRI. And then you can also scroll through the bucket notes to see what's the status of your documents. There are some fields that are available for you to edit in RIMS, and there are some fields that you will not be able to edit. So if you see the fields that are not grayed out, you can update those fields either by clicking on the free text space, or you can use the pencil icon and edit that information. And there are some fields where you won't be able to edit. This information gets populated from the bulk upload template. But if there is something that you need to edit, you can reach out to NRI and they will help you with that. Some more information. So once the documents are submitted and ISO reviews those documents, you will get the project updates, project memo updates at 10 a.m. every day when there is any change in the status, whether the document is accepted, or if it is not accepted, then you will receive those project memo emails. You can always log into RIMS and check the status on where the documents are, what is the status. You can check that at any time. But whenever there is any change in any of these fields or any of the document status, you will receive an email with the updates. Okay, that's the end of my presentation on SCME projects. And at the end of this presentation, we have included some helpful links for the NRI guide and checklist and RIMS guide. We have also included the external procedure for the SQMD submission. So this procedure talks about required metering documents, file naming convention, and what's needed in those documents. And we have also included links for the WEIM resources and participating and non-participating resources. So, any questions?
I'm not seeing any questions in the room.
We do have 2 questions virtually. Let's go to Ali. Ali, please introduce yourself and your affiliation. Thank you.
Hey, Priyanka, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I do have a couple of questions. When exactly these changes is going to be applied, switching from NRI to RIMS?
Good question. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. So we are aiming by November 1st, but before that, we'll release a CBT. So we are working on the CBT. We want to gather all your questions today and include that information in the CBT. So within 1-2 weeks, we will send out notifications on when we will be switching to this RIMS. The existing projects that are already created in NRI, so you can continue submitting all your documents. Any new project creations after the cutover date will have to be created in RIMS. But we will send notifications once we have the CBT ready and the cutover date ready.
And you're going to send the instruction again for that notification, right?
Correct. We'll include the CBT in the notification.
Okay, and as you mentioned, for any project that we already have with NRI, if any modification or something needed for any project detail or any form, we still need to go with the city ticket, right?
No. So today, if there is any modification or any new resource in WEIM BA, you will use the NRI process. So you will email the project details form to NRI to create the project. And once the project is created, you will submit the updated SQMD plan to NRI. It's not through city
Let's say
ticket.
that we have an existing project submitted last year, and for any reason, some modification needed on project detail forms or SQMD form or something. If it's happening after November 1st, we still need to go with the old process, right?
No, after the cutover date, let's say if it is November 1st, we have not finalized the date yet. We are aiming for November 1st. After November 1st, it will be using RIMS. And before that, it will be the existing NRI process.
So in RIMS, we can just define the existing project number, right?
No, you would have to create the new projects. The process is same for NRI. Even in NRI, once the project is closed, you would create a new project in NRI Similarly, you will have to create a new project, even for the modifications. You'll create a new project and submit the modified SQMD plan or updated SQMD plan.
So your system is going to be automatically recognize that this new project is just related to the old project and they are the same project?
You will provide that information in the SQMD plan, whether it is a new resource or whether you are making an update to the existing resource.
And last question, all the other forms, like the SCA letter, RCA letter, or GRDT files, everything is going to be submitted through these RIMs for future time, right?
Andrew, do we know if RDT is also going through RIMS? No, so it's only the metering documents
Okay,
for the
cool.
SCME
Thank you.
project.
Yeah, thank you.
And maybe just to emphasize, we're going to get into it a little bit later about some of the RIMS upgrade that we're working. It's kind of a slower burn process that we're trying to get this more of a centralized location for you all, so you don't have to submit things in 3 different areas. It's easier to track, keep on top of, and so that's the next step. Will be the market documents to get that also in RIMS. So ideally, long term, you'll see it all in one spot in RIMS.
Brenda, do we have any more questions?
Yes, we do. One is asking, will we see all our existing projects in RIMS once it is live?
No, we will not be able to migrate the existing NRI projects to RIMS. So it will be only the projects that are created in RIMS. You will have visibility for them.
We do have Danny back up from SRP. Go. Oh, no, he lowered his hand. If anyone has a question, please keep your hand raised if you like. Thank you. Okay, we have Danny. Let's go ahead and unmute Danny.
It's too fast on that. Hi, everybody. Again, it's Danny Zemensky from Salt River Project. Since we are kind of addressing the NRI items here, I just don't know if it's going to be in this meeting or the one tomorrow to discuss more about the CAISO effective date. And I don't want to derail the meeting if that's more a discussion for tomorrow's meeting.
We'll actually talk about that later today.
Sweet. Thank you.
Brenda, are there any other questions online? I'm not seeing any others in the room.
No questions at this time.
Great. So with that, we'll take about a 10-minute break and return around 10:20.
Thank you.
everyone. Welcome back. Next, we'll be hearing from Andrew Brown regarding adding a resource to the WEIM.
All right. Okay, so we will pick up again. So Danny was kind of bringing up the difference between today and tomorrow. And so I just wanted to take a quick minute to discuss. So today is for the WEIM only. So this is training is entirely focused for WEIM entities. Tomorrow is for CAISO BA entities. And so if you're participating in the WEIM, you do not need to attend anything tomorrow because it won't really pertain to the WEIM. It's going to be focused on the CAISO BA. The training we're putting on today is for the WEIM entities. So just want to make that clear for the intentions of the trainings over the different days. So, but one of the things that we do want to talk about is part of this for the WEIM, onboarding a new resource and what steps need to be taken. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So one of the things is what is a WEIM participating resource? And some of the questions that we're getting from some of the WEIM entities, and especially as we look to some of the members that are going to be participating in EDAM, there's increased interest from maybe third-party entities who are interested in building a generator and then participating in the market where perhaps the entirety of the resource won't be consumed by the WEIM entity or the BA. And so you have these third-party participants. And so I just want to highlight this, the definition of a WEIM participating resource. And so the first term specifically refers to the owner, operator, or seller of the energy. But then the eligibility portion, which is what they have to meet those eligibility requirements. And so those eligibility requirements then fall under the, for the owner or operator to fulfill the requirements established by the WEIM entity, which is essentially the balancing authority area. So whoever the balancing authority is, they have the overall say in whether or not a resource can participate in either the WEIM or EDAM. And so I wanted to kind of point that out because we've occasionally gotten questions about this. So the WEIM entity, which is essentially the balancing authority area, has the overall say in what the eligibility requirements are for a resource to participate within the energy markets. So the next item I wanted to talk about is just the process overview. So essentially we have three main steps that have to be completed, kind of large steps, but first is adding the resource to the Western Interconnection Model. So that's the modeling portion. Then a SCME project has to be completed. So that's the metering portion. And then we have to complete the market setup process. And those are the market documents process. And so trying to use different words from what would normally be maybe used with like the CAISO BA NRI process. And that's intentional to show like the delineation that there are two separate and distinct processes. And what you do in one process doesn't necessarily correlate to the other process. And so we might have similar documents, but as I mentioned before, our goal is to move all of the required documents into one area so that you're not going throughout the CAISO website finding different documents that you might need. So, so for the first slide here that we'll talk through is determining the submission date. And again, we're going to be using the model implementation schedule. This is kind of the overall document that guides what the dates and deadlines will be for a number of the processes, but I will kind of step a little bit further into when you're getting to the market documents of how all those timelines interplay together. So we saw for the modeling, you'd look at what your in-service or energization date is of your generator, check that against the production deployment date, and then work back to figure out what all of your deadlines are. So this is kind of a quick recap. Again, these documents, these presentations that we have, the goal is that you would be able to refer back to these even without somebody speaking and be able to understand what you need to do. So again, here we have kind of explanations of what each one of these columns are. So the customer model document submission deadline, that is when all of the documentation has to be accepted within RIMS for the model build. And then we have the final scope. That's when the scope is published that lists all of the projects that are going to be completed in the modeling by the model production deployment date. We have the late model scope change request deadline. Again, that's a request. It's getting harder and harder for the modeling teams to accommodate late scopes just because of the sheer volume of modeling projects that are submitted. Then we have the production deployment deadline, and so that production deployment is generally the week of, and that would be when the model is going into production. And then we have this other area that I introduced on this, which is the project implementation date, and we're kind of, in some of our items, we'll refer to that as time T. That is the earliest date that the generator is going to either begin like testing or operations, and must be included in the Western interconnection model. So that's when they're going to start having impacts on the system. And that would also include like some of the market readiness items. So that would include like the GRDT and their SC association. So that's like when the resource is ready to participate in the market. So that is what we're going to refer to as time T. And again, you can find this model schedule at the Western EIM website, and then under the resources page, and it's integrate with the ISO full network model is the section that it's under. So we're going to go through again. This is kind of should be pretty easy at this point for all of us, hopefully getting easier every time you do this, but identifying the target production date. So in this case, we have a TOP that is bringing on a new generator, and the earliest date the equipment will be energized will be 6/30 of 2026. And so we're going to look through to see which production deployment deadline we need to meet. Going through, we see that the 26 month 6 has a deployment the week of 6/15. That would allow us to meet our 6/30 energization date. If we wanted to put it in earlier, you could also put it in 26 month 4. And then as we mentioned in the previous slides, the TOP could open the disconnect, put in an outage card to open the disconnect, which would reflect the generator being offline until the scheduling coordinator was able to put in an OMS card. And the resource could sit in outage until that 6/30 date. And that would be perfectly fine as well. That would be okay. So the latest, that 26 month 6 is the latest that you would be able to put it into the model and still accommodate your energization date. So in this case, all those market documents would need to be submitted by March 25th, 2026. And then the SCME project, so this is kind of taking this a step forward from where we were at before. The SCME project can be created once the modeling project is created. So you can start that meter process as soon as the metering or the modeling project is created, keeping in mind that you'd want to utilize that same resource ID. And then the market documents can be submitted when? Those can be submitted once the SCME documents have been accepted and the model has been deployed. So you wouldn't be able to submit it any earlier than 6/15. And again, like I had mentioned previously, generally the model deploys on a Wednesday. So the week of 6/15, 6/15 is a Monday. So the 17th would be the absolute earliest that you would want to probably put in your scheduling coordinator letters for the SC association effective date. So that's where timing it really close. If you wanted to put the next week, that would also be acceptable. But if you had like some kind of a very close call where you had to have it in by the, say the 17th was the date you had to have it in, then you could work through that with our SC requests and our full network model team to accommodate that. So running through this again, so if we have a target energization of June 30th of 2026, we'll just kind of run through these different items here. So if we're putting together our timeline, we're going to tell our modeling team all of those full network model documents have to be accepted in RIMS by March 25th. That's the date we have to have them in. Moving to our model and SCME processing. Once we've submitted our documents, we have our model, the model is being built. We can start our SCME project. The SCME project has to be started at least 40 calendar days prior to our in-service date. I see I made a slight error here. So in this example, I put in 6/15, which is the production deployment date. That's the wrong date. I'll make sure to update that. It should be 6/30. And so the since I used the target energization on 6/30, that date should have been 6/30. But in this case, it won't hurt anything if you create that project earlier. So in this case, that project, the SCME project, would need to be created by May 6th of 2026. So that's at least 40 calendar days prior to 6/15. And then the SCME documents have to be accepted prior to the market documents being accepted. So, and then moving into our market setup. So at this point, the full network model has gone into production. Our SCME project is completed. So if we wanted to meet that 6/15 date, then our market documents would have to be submitted beginning on 6/1, and that's at least 10 business days prior to the effective date. But it can't be, the effective date can't be before the model production date. And so this, if we take a step back and think of, we're putting in our characteristics for the resource. If the resource isn't in the model, we can't attach the characteristics to it. So that base topology has to be put in place. So we have to wait for the model to go into production so that we can then put in our generator characteristics onto the generator. So in this case, the market documents would need to be submitted no earlier than 6/1. And again, all of these things you can do well in advance. We're kind of showing a just-in-time type registration, which you can see when you do just-in-time, it starts to get really confusing on when things have to be, like, they absolutely have to be submitted. So again, if you went into the previous model build, we like went back one, and let's say we submitted this into 26-month 4, the resource goes into production. You can see there April 13th. So it's in production in April. You would have almost 2 months where you could put together your market documents, submit your SC association, all those things, and you don't have this time crunch. So there is a lot of anxiety removed the earlier you submit those documents. So in this case, we'll move back. So we've submitted our market documents on 6/1, and the effective date that's used in the SQMD plan and the market documents is after 6/15. So at that point, our resource is in the market, available to begin testing whenever we decide to remove the WebOMS outage. So that's kind of the different trains there on how you would submit all of these documents. So I think right now I'm going to pause and ask if there are any questions on this, because I know these timelines, it gets really confusing.
I'm not seeing any hands raised in the room.
Okay.
Brenda, are there any questions online?
No questions at this time.
Okay. All right. So that's kind of the timelines. Now we'll move through like what we need to do to add a resource to the full network model. So in this case, we just had a whole presentation on how we add a resource to the full network model. So in this case, as far as who can update the full network model, so that is the WEIM entity. So we would be looking for whoever the WEIM entity, they would be the ones who would need to submit that modeling information. So I want to be clear on that. If you're a third-party developer, you cannot submit the modeling information. You would need to work with the balancing area that the resource is residing in, would need to be the one that handles all of that modeling. So then as far as submitting the full network model, again, this will follow the full network model schedule that's posted. We've covered all of this as far as where those full network modeling updates are submitted. They'll be put into RIMS. And again, only the balancing area or a TOP, if they've been assigned those responsibilities by the balancing area, can update the full network model. So completing an SCME project, again, we had Priyanka provide a presentation on how to complete an SCME project in RIMS. We'll be moving that into this presentation when we post these slides. So that would be the WEIM scheduling coordinator meter entity presentation that Priyanka just did. And we'll move those slides into this once when we post these after the forum. So the next step is to complete the market setup process, but I think there was a question I thought I saw come through, so maybe we'll pause and check that.
Brenda, did you want to read the question we received online?
Oh yeah, sure. Tanisha asked, do you require the SQMD and market document dates to be the same?
As far as the effective date, they should be the same. But again, recognizing that if you end up like changing the dates, you wouldn't want the effective date of the resource to be prior to like the SQMD plan. So again, submitting these documents earlier and then having them be effective, but utilizing WebOMS to do an outage of the resource would be the preferred method to kind of delay that. If you absolutely had to move the data, you could reach out to our EDAS group about updating the effective date of the SQMD plan. And if they can accommodate that, they could work with you on that to see if it's something that they can accommodate.
And we're not seeing any other questions in the queue.
Okay. All right. So now we'll kind of run through the market setup process. And so the prerequisites for this WEIM resource market setup is the resource has to be in the full network model build. So the model submission checklist items have been submitted and accepted prior to that model build acceptance deadline. A model build has been assigned. The SCME process has been completed. That primarily means the SQMD plan has been accepted. So we'll take a second to review where we're at now in this. So this is a kind of a complicated swim lane chart that kind of goes through the different processes. The main things to keep up is like just where different activities occur. So you can see when we have that customer model document acceptance deadline, at that point, the modeling documents have been submitted and accepted. And then if you go down to that resource owner, you can see that they're going to start creating the SCME project. So once those documents are done, you can create that SCME project. Going through the WEM entity, since I said like the BA is the only one that can submit those modeling documents, they'll be able to see the model build has been assigned and that been included in the final scope, which was published at the ISO. The resource owner has created the SCME deliverables. They have coordinated with their scheduling coordinator metered entity to ensure that those deliverables make sense, and then they are going to submit that to the ISO. At the same time, that SCME process, we will review it. The EDAS group will review that and determine if that information is correct. And so some of the things in here, we have like kind of helpful tips. So when you're submitting your documents for the full network model, you'd want to submit those at a minimum of 10 days in advance. 20 days is better. The model build, you can see that when that is assigned and then the scope is published, to tell you that it's included in the model build for sure is when you can start like that SCME process once that's been accepted. And then as far as the SCME process, you wouldn't want to start submitting your market documents. You can see until that SCME process is complete. And then once that SCME process is complete, you'd want to do that market setup. And then you can see you have your final effective date of when the resource is effective in the market. And so the model build that you're included in is what's going to determine that earliest effective date or implementation date. And so you couldn't have the effective date, like I said before, be prior to the production deployment date because the resource won't be in the model. It won't be in the production model where it's able to be assigned any generator characteristics. So something to keep in mind with that. So kind of going through the four main roles of the market setup process and their responsibilities. So we have here the resource owner. So they have to ensure that they've met all the WEIM entity requirements. And then they would need to complete any regulatory contracts. And then they need to make sure they have the resource ready for market operations. You have either the WEIM or participating resource scheduling coordinator, depending on whether it's a non-participating resource or a participating resource. They'll be responsible for creating any SCIDs or BSCIDs that might be needed. And then they'll have to work with the resource owner to complete those deliverables. And then they would also be expected to submit those city deliverables, those market documents that need to be uploaded in the city. The WEIM entity, they would be, as the balancing authority, they would be the ones who are doing those model build submissions to RIMS. They'll also ensure that the resource has met all of their WEIM entity requirements. And then they would provide that WEIM entity approval notification into city stating that they approve that the resource is eligible for participation. And part of this is that the CAISO is going to model the resource. We will review all of the submittals and process the SC association and ensure that the WEIM requirements have been met. So that's like the general roles of who's doing what. When you look back at that, the swim chart here, the swim lanes, each one of those entities has specific requirements that they have to fulfill when they're reviewing the market documents. So again, kind of getting back to, this is a document that we expect to be a resource for all of you to use as you work forward on submittals. So we have some of the abbreviations that we've used here. This industry is always very heavy on abbreviations. And so I find this kind of helpful when you're first getting started. So moving into this market setup process requirement. So we have the processes on the left, and then we have like the documents that will need to be submitted on the right. And so for the processes, you have prior to submitting like your SC letters, if you are creating a new scheduling coordinator ID or base scheduling coordinator ID, you would need to create that ahead of time. That does take some time to complete. If you have regulatory contracts, those would also need to be complete ahead of submitting all of your documentation. and then your WEIM entity approvals, making sure you're working with the balancing authority that they are on board with the resource. And then your SC association, reaching out to your scheduling coordinator to have them review the market documents that are being submitted, and then they would be the ones who would initiate that change request, which goes into city. And then making sure that everybody is aware of that WEIM effective date, the date that the resource will be participating in the market. So as far as on the setup side, the market documents, for this, you would need to have your WEIM participating resource notification. So you'd want to make sure that the resource is approved. If you don't have that approval and you submit all of your documents, and let's say you only give yourself 10 days, but you haven't coordinated with the WEIM entity and it takes them 7 days to get back, you're probably going to have to select a new effective date. We won't process the change request for the resource until we have that participating resource notification. We want to make sure that the balancing authority approves of the resource prior to them starting to participate in the market. So that's why it's on top, because it is a gating item. Without that, you will not move forward into the market. So the new scheduling coordinator acceptance letter and selection letter. So basically the resource owner would select a scheduling coordinator, and then the scheduling coordinator will accept that selection. And then the GRDT would be submitted. And then there's also an RCA disclosure form, the SEID, and if you need one, a base schedule ID. And then also the EIM participating resource schedule 1 update. So if it's a participating resource, that schedule 1 will need to be updated. So those are the kind of the documents that will be required through this process. So for regulatory contracts, essentially the market setup process is going to start there. So the participating resource owner will need to confirm with the EIM entity that they've fulfilled all the modeling requirements. And then they would also want to confirm with RDT, which is our master file group, and with SC request that the resource has been modeled. Once the modeling is confirmed, you can reach out to regulatory contracts to request an update to the Schedule 1 with the new resource. And then once that Schedule 1 is updated, you can move on with the process. So having those regulatory contracts completed is step 1. The WEIM entity notification. So after completing those regulatory contracts, the WEIM entity should confirm that the participating resource has met the requirements. And if it has, it will send its official participating resource approval notification through city. And then this is the sample wording that is normally used. And so we have in here that the EIM entity, and so that is the BA, that's not the resource owner stating that they have met the requirements. This should be coming from the BA stating that the resource has met the requirements. So the EIM entity is a tariff defined term, and essentially it means like the balancing authority area entity. So the generator resource data template. So again, the GRDT, we've made some improvements on the kind of doing some explanations for the GRDT. And so those are going to be added to the Western EIM resource webpage in the near future. We're working through the update process right now on that website. And then what's included in these updates is essentially a guidebook for assistance in preparing the final GRDT, and helps fill out the information that's required for submission, and it'll include a link to the GRDT definitions document. And then it also provides an example GRDT with tips on how to populate each column. So that will be posted shortly, more than likely sometime this week on the Western EIM webpage. So for the SC Association, that process should be coordinated with the scheduling coordinator, and then CAISO's SC request group submitted through city along with all of the other documents. So the SC should be submitting the following documents through city: the SC selection letter, the SC acceptance letter, that WEIM GRDT, the resource control agreement, and the WEIM entity notification. And then SC request will review all these documents and inform the scheduling coordinator of any deficiencies through city. And if there are any, then the SC will need to resubmit those documents and may need to push out the effective date that's within those SC selection letters. These are some flowcharts. They're very confusing, so I'm not going to cover them right now. But the market setup process difference. So the example that I just gave was for a participating resource. So if you're a new WEIM participating resource, that is the process that you would use, is what I just outlined. If you're a new non-participating resource, the process is similar, but there's a few differences. The regulatory contracts are not required, and the non-participating resources will work with the WEIM entity scheduling coordinator instead of the WEIM participating resource scheduling coordinator. So the non-participating resources, they just have a base schedule that gets submitted. They don't participate in the market. And then the WEIM entity final approval is not required because the WEIM entity is the scheduling coordinator. So again, it's handled by that WEIM entity SC. If it's a non-participating resource that wishes to convert to a participating resource, the existing non-participating resources would follow the same process as the new participating resource. The key difference is they have to, the WEIM entity scheduling coordinator will submit an SC relinquishing letter. And this is assuming that the scheduling coordinator is changing. If the scheduling coordinator isn't changing, then you wouldn't need to take any action on the scheduling coordinator portion. But essentially, the WEIM entity scheduling coordinator would submit an SC relinquishing letter at the same time that the participating resource scheduling coordinator submits their SC acceptance and selection letters. And so those relinquishing letters should correspond to a clear cutoff where the relinquishing date is like the day before at 11:59, and then the new SC coordinator takes over at midnight. So that's kind of there. The effective date of the relinquishing letter should be minus 1 day from the effective date of the acceptance letter. So post-effective date, so your resource is in the market, you've been operating for a while, and now you might have some items that might come up where you need to do changes. So in this case, if the SQMD plan needs to be updated, this is like some of the reasons the resource may need to update their SQMD plan. And this could be that they are going to be repowering, they're modifying the meter data interval, or they're adding some kind of generator capacity. So they would need to create a new SCME project for this, and they would need to complete and submit the SQMD plan with the SLD. You can't use your old SCME project and just update it. Once those projects are completed, they are considered a snapshot in time and like a time capsule, and they're closed down. So if you need to make a new an adjustment to the SQMD plan, you'll need to create a new SCME project in order to do that. And so once the project is considered complete, once you have an email, or when we get into RIMS, you'll be able to see that the project is complete, but you'll get an email notification in either way, which would show all the required deliverables as accepted and the project marked as completed. For resource removal, so if a resource needs to be end dated or removed from the WEIM, these are the following steps. If it's a non-participating resource, the WEIM entity scheduling coordinator will just submit a relinquishing letter via city, and then the WEIM entity will remove the resource from the next full network model. If it's a participating resource, it will be similar steps. The WEIM participating resource scheduling coordinator will submit a relinquishing letter with an end date into city. The resource owner will also request an update to their Schedule 1. Our SC group will process that change request, and then again, the WEIM entity will remove the resource in the next full network model. Here's a list of resources that we have. So a lot of these are on the WEIM, the Western EIM webpage under the resources page. So we have the WEIM procedure for non-participating and participating resources. So that covers a lot of the topics that I just talked about. Also on the WEIM resource page, we have a link to like the full network model schedule, the GRDT, the model submission checklist. A lot of these documents are located there. And then we also have some emails for the different groups that you may need to send emails into if there's any questions there. So that is kind of it for this presentation.
Thank you. And I'm not seeing any questions in the room. Brenda, are there any questions online?
Yes, we do have Ali, and then we'll go to Danny next. But Ali, can you please make sure to introduce yourself and your affiliation, just to make sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. Can you hear me good?
Yep.
Okay, I just have a question regarding the production and map stage. So I think last year we had a conversation asking Kaiser if the new resources, any new resources just pop up in the map stage prior of the production. So is it happening, or because we still have this issue? I mean, there is a checkbox in the SCA letter. We can ask that, hey, we need this resource to be registered in the map stage as well, but most of the time we can see the resources in production, and the in map stage is going to be pop up after a while. And the reason that we need it in map stage first, that we need to do some testing or something with like the third party one, see what's going on, and then after that transfer to the production.
Yeah, I think I can take that one. It's definitely something that we're aware of and want to work towards. There's a lot of challenges with the map stage environment, as in what testing's going on, and anytime you enter a new model, it kind of reverts some of that ongoing preparation and testing. So it does make it difficult to make those changes as often as we'd like. However, we have been working through a potential workaround solution that we're hoping to get more traction on, and that, you know, at least there would be some visibility in which you could see the resource come through your systems. But we haven't figured that out. It is something that we're aware of and working on, but need to detail out the process with all the different teams involved, since it hits so many different applications.
Let's go ahead and unmute Ali. And Ali's from NV Energy, just in case he wants to respond. Go ahead.
No, that's the only thing that I was wondering. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Danny. Go ahead.
Everybody, again, it's Danny from Salt River Project. Thank you for that, Andrew and team, because it does help a lot. Like Andrew said, I think in the one slide with the abbreviations, it does have given me a few more questions. I don't know if maybe you could go back to the slide with the full network model timeline, just so I can kind of understand, because we're really trying to do what you're saying, go early, put it in an outage. But for the CAISO effective dates, and I think that's kind of maybe what Tanisha was talking about too. So just looking at the first one there, yeah, even just the first line there. So if we're thinking it's going to go in 2/9/2026, would our CAISO effective date then be like 2 weeks after that, or would it be before that? So that would be the date that we would put on the SQMD and on the selection letter.
Yeah, so it would be after, the effective date would have to be after that. And again, this is where if you think of, you know, if we're like building a car, you have the frame, which is essentially what is being submitted in the Western interconnection modeling. So you're just laying out like the base of it. And now if you want to start adding in all of your different options and other items that you want to put on that, you have to have the car first.
Right.
completed before you can start adding. So the effective date is like the options. That's when you're going to have like a scheduling coordinator assigned to it. You're going to have your PMin and PMax that you plan on using for all the GRDT parameters. So all those GRDT parameters get assigned to it at that time. So in that case, the effective date is when you want to, is when all those things are going to be assigned to the base topology that was submitted previously. And so in this case, if you're looking at the week of 2/9, that's when the base is out into production. And so anytime after that, you can add in all those options. So maybe that's might be like the helpful to clarify. The market documents that you submit can be added at any time after the production date. It doesn't have to coincide with the production date. We just need to have the base model in production so that we can add in the different options that you have through those market documents. So your scheduling coordinator, your GRDT, those are the items that have to be added after the production date.
Oh,
So
that's even okay, because that was kind of my next question. Thank you, because that's where I was going to go into the bucket concept with some of those ones where it seems like it's different now, where you had to do a couple items first to be able to then turn in the SQMD and RCA letter. So now it sounds like we can turn them all in at once.
So the SCME documents, that SCME still needs to be completed prior to the market documents being submitted. And so the metering and the modeling can be done in parallel. So those can be parallel operations. And then the market documents would have to be submitted after the modeling has gone into the production environment and the SQMD plan has been accepted.
Okay. And then just one last question on some forecasting items for like the solar and wind for the topo map and the site sheet information for the participating resources. That's still required, correct? I thought I saw something about med stations in one of the slides, but I just wasn't sure.
Yeah, so it's the site info and topo map are only required if you're going to be requesting an ISO forecast. If you're not requesting an ISO forecast, if you have your own forecast service provider and you're just going to be submitting that information, that forecast information in, then you do not need to submit a site info and topo map.
Awesome, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, that's only if you want the ISO to provide to generate the forecast for the variable energy resource.
Thank you. And then just my last final question. Sorry, I'm taking too much, but you always are very helpful. You mentioned the difference between the selection acceptance letter and the selection.
Yeah, the selection, the acceptance.
So one we were calling it as the resource owner form, where we would have the developer kind of fill that out. So it sounds like that's that one. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So the owner, the scheduling coordinator owner letter and the scheduling coordinator selection, that's like the same thing. It's basically you're selecting a scheduling coordinator, and then the SC acceptance is just the scheduling coordinator accepting those responsibilities for the resource.
Thank you, as always, Yura. Really appreciate that clarification.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm not seeing any other questions online or in person. So with that, we will take an approximately 10-minute break and come back around 11:15 a.m. Pacific time.
Thank you.
Welcome back. We'll now be hearing from Gina Wanser on operational challenges, ICCP best practices.
Okay. Let me just make sure. This thing is in a weird spot, this microphone, so can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, all right. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the operational challenges and some of the ICCP best practices, more focused on the new resource implementation side of things for WEIM and RC, but just knowing that a lot of these ICCP practices actually apply on both the transmission and new resource side. So I'll skip this because we've already done this, but don't forget you can put questions in the chat and raise your hand. So in this next hour, we're actually going to plan to review operational impacts that are associated with the ICCP or real-time telemetry for those who may not maybe use the words ICCP. And then we'll talk about how another entity, Portland General Electric, manages their new resource ICCP implementation. So we'll cover some of those slides. We have a little bit of a shift in presenters today. And then we'll have a discussion to we'll use that to maybe lead into some brainstorming and practice sharing amongst the participants on the line and in the room. And then we'll talk about some of the things we're exploring for next steps, kind of like the last couple sessions. Okay, so in terms of actually the operational impact perspective, we want to first kind of level set and introduce, right, what is WEIM and RC West? Hopefully most of the people here are aware of what those functions are and what are some of the things that we're doing as part of those functions. But then what we really want to do is look at how does that impact our operators within the control room. So those are folks on our side who may be interacting with folks on your side to operate within these functions and some of the things that they're experiencing in real time. So this impacts not only our folks, but also yours. We'll also identify potential impacts or outcomes as part of this, right, from lack of, lack of ICCP or inaccurate telemetry or to ICCP, and the impact to our collective operations teams. And then we'll talk a little bit briefly on when we do have ICCP modeled, what are some other areas of a diligence that we want to, put some focus on to support the most accurate market solution and prevent things like, settlements issues, deviation, that sort of thing, right? So first, just to kind of briefly touch on the topic, right? WEIM is a market which is economic, security constrained, does market-based dispatching. So that's kind of that economic piece, right? And as the market operator, our role is really, might want to finish my slide here, but our role is really to manage the market itself, right? We're not doing the bidding, we're not doing the things within the market. We're more so making sure the market is functioning, that it's doing the correct intervals, running these processes that are part of the market, that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, that it's getting the right payloads from its supporting systems, that it's sending the right payloads to its other systems, right? So if you've ever been on the SC side of things and all of a sudden the ADS is not getting the dispatches from the market, right? Our RTMOs are some of the people and the market operator side of things that are helping facilitate getting that corrected, right? Helping notify folks, get things going. So to kind of talk about the market itself, it is optimizing the generation output within the BA area and then the energy transfer between each area, right? And it's built on a optimization, like a calculation. So we have all these inputs going in, it's running an optimization or calculation, coming out with a set of results based on those inputs. It's also allowing for BAs, or rather TOPs within the BA, to manage their congestion on transmission lines, right? So if we have maybe too much generation or not enough generation in an area, to allow for them to kind of economically dispatch the markets to manage that congestion. So the RTMOs are in the control room. These are the ones that are interacting with the WEIM entity BA or EIM desk. So an EIM desk typically within the BA side. And they're, again, kind of monitoring the market processes, making sure they're completed, you know, dealing with maybe if there are discrepancies or issues, or, you know, if something in the market function is not working as, you know, expected. They're also, you know, monitoring for maybe abnormalities that we might see, but this is really kind of a key role that they're playing. And what they're not doing is like maybe seeing, is that the dispatch that you were expecting, right? So there could be discrepancies maybe in the dispatch. They may not see that at an individual level, right? Because they're monitoring across the WEIM participant footprint, right? Now, the RTMOs may notice an abnormality and reach out and try, you know, we want you guys to be successful. We want it to be running as designed and accurately. So there may be those interactions. So there are times too where the BA side is reaching out to the RTMOs to help investigate why something isn't working like they thought it would be working, right? So this is the role of the RTMOs, and really a critical piece of helping make sure real time is kind of running as we'd like it to, right? Or not as we'd like it to, but as kind of real life is showing, right? And that forward-looking 5-minute view. So the reason why this is important is because we'll talk about some of the common issues that we might run into without ICCP, right? So a lot of the examples we covered today are examples that the RTMOs commonly will, you know, see as an outcome, you know, based on some of these issues reported and what they've really like identified as potential ICCP driven issues. So on the other side of the boat, right, so we have market side, we also have reliability. Mute yourself, please. So that was for folks in the room, sorry. So we have the reliability side as well. So California ISO has the RC West function as well, where we oversee grid compliance with federal and regional grid standards, right? So managing Western interconnection reliability within our footprint here, so you could see on the map. Now we're trying to ensure effective and efficient reduction of risk, right? Preventing emergency situations, cascading issues across the West, maintaining reliability, right? So we have the market function, really important, really for, you know, trying to do an optimal economic usage, but we really want to make sure we're still maintaining reliability across the footprints, right? So while we have a set of footprint, we're also coordinating with other entities, right? Our neighboring reliability coordinating entities, so that could be SPP or Alberta, right? In terms of issues that may go across our boundaries. Now, the RC operators need their visibility, right? One of the things that they're doing is running a consistent you know, analysis of if we lose something, what is the result of that, right? Are we going to result in some sort of, you know, potential overload? Are we going to result in an overload that's going to cascade to another transmission line and another transmission line? And therefore we need to kind of work on, you know, hey, how do we mitigate this? And we work with our BAs and TOPs to do that. Now, to do that, we have to have tools, right? To like, you know, calculate these things, to also just see what are the normal flows on a line today, right, or in current time. So they're monitoring those things, working with the TOPs to, you know, manage those things. The BAs are really helping manage the generation aspect, right, and mitigating those issues. So to have that, we need accurate data. And this, we'll talk a little bit about how that drives some of our tools. But the RC operators, you know, they play a role in this as well in terms of having to have the ICCP data to make sure we can ensure reliability across the West. Okay. So as new resources begin to energize, the physical transmission system we're experiencing increased flows, potential new topology. There's all these changes happening potentially with a new resource, right? We could be adding a new substation. We could be adding a substation within transmission, like a larger network, and plugging flows that could go in either direction. We may have variability in output, right, due to the fuel type. So if we have a resource that may be going up and down based on wind availability or, solar. Potentially, we may have resources that are a mix of fuel types. And then we have variability in output based on testing outcomes, right? So potentially you're in a testing phase for your new resource and, you're having issues. You're not maybe outputting as much as you thought you'd be outputting, right? You're experiencing some challenges during the testing and trying to work through those. Right. So these grid conditions, when we have these, they require visibility for both the market operator and the reliability coordinator to make sure that those functions can work, accordingly, both to make sure the market is running in it with an accurate set of data and an accurate assessment, right, of the current state and the future state. And they're needed for those software optimizations, right? So all this data is really providing visibility to these software systems and to the operators to ensure that we can look for those functions and, actually make decisions based on these. Now, lack of valid information can result in inadvertent actions, inadvertent dispatches, right? And these, we'll talk a little more in detail on maybe specifics to that. So just really quick, let's revisit. So Andrew talked about this slide earlier, right? That we have a model a full network model. It has reliability data, it has market data. Certain data is really just for one purpose or the other. So some goes for market purposes, right? Like bids, you put bids for market information, which tie to the model. We have reliability information like ratings that are helping manage, are we in an issue where we're overloading some form of equipment? So these are, the model is there as core infrastructure, and it's actually feeding, for the purpose of today's conversation, kind of the real-time assessment and management tools. So these are the tools that our operators are using, and hopefully at your organizations, there's tools that you have as well to do this real-time assessment, right? Or real-time management. So depending on where you're working, you might have different sets of tools. For us, there are kind of three main real-time assessment tools. So we have, the market itself, right? So that's kind of, we've talked a little bit about what that is. But there's the UI and the tool of using that to, look at what data, what inputs are we getting to help the market run its processes, optimize, and then ultimately provide dispatches. We have also real-time state estimator and contingency analysis. So taking in that model, taking in the real-time data and then calculating where do we think the system is based on the current input. So that's what the state estimator is. The market and the reliability side both have their forms of state estimator, right? So this is, again, based on current topology and all the inputs you've given me, I'm going to calculate what I think the flow is on all the lines and all the generators and align that also with, the ICCP is leveraged to do some of those calculations. The next form of the reliability side is doing contingency analysis, right? So again, I kind of mentioned this, taking out a line and seeing what happens to the system when I take out a line. And we're doing that across thousands of contingencies and then seeing what the results of those are. Now, if you have inaccurate data, this could, result in some unexpected consequences, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The market also actually does its own form of contingency analysis, right? So this is where we talked a little bit about briefly on congestion management, right? It's just hey, we're protecting for the next N-1 or the next, thing, and, redispatching generation in an economical way. So not everybody uses that, but that is something there. So EMS, right? EMS is one of the tools that our operators use to see the ICCP. So this is how we get our ICCP And we may use tools like Pi or, EMS directly to see what is the status of a generator now, right? What is the status of this transmission line now? How much flow is on it? What breakers are closed? And this is then feeding, right? Again, that state estimator of this is what we expect the topology to be and where the generators are at today or at this moment in time. So the real-time RTMOs have this, right? BA operators have some form of this usually, or TOP operators have a form of their own contingency analysis. If you're at an RC West entity, like a customer of the RC West crew, then you may have HANA, or you may be monitoring HANA, which is, looking at our version of contingency analysis. So let's talk a little bit about these actual scenarios where there's no correct, I don't know why I keep doing this. When there is no ICCP or incorrect ICCP associated with a resource, this can result in basically what you've maybe experienced before, which is incorrect solution, discrepancies in calculations of the current state of the system, right? So I'm looking at what the market or the contingency analysis, the RTCA tool is seeing as my current state, and these flows don't look quite correct, right? So this is kind of one of the repercussions of when we don't have accurate ICCP or accurate input data in general, not just ICCP, but accurate input data, that can be, impacting the reliability view and assessment. So this can lead to, and I kind of will start with the reliability side this time and then move into the market. So lack of visibility potentially to line exceedances of, a reliability rating, right? So the RC, again, their job is to monitor across the West, within our footprint, monitor what are flows on lines, and if they're seeing issues, really work with the TOP on what their mitigation plan is to prevent a larger interconnected issue, right? So if we don't have visibility to the ICCP, we may not actually see that the line is exceeding the rating that we have on our model for your line. So this is an issue, right? And the whole idea is that we're really trying to protect against equipment damage, widespread concerns across the West, right? So this is resulting in lower visibility on transmission assets. We could be having consequences for loss of another resource or transmission asset because we didn't have the right calculation happening. The resource may not look like, here's actually a really good example. So if we have the incorrect breaker flow, the topology could actually show incorrect. And when I say topology, we could see a line out of service when it's actually in service. And then the resource may not look like it has a place to go, right? Depending on where it's at, it may say, well, I see a breaker open, so I'm estimating that that line's not in service, and therefore I'm going to say this generator is offline and not contributing to the flows on that part of the transmission. So these are areas where if we don't have the accurate data, we may not have the right calculations within the tools. And I think these are things that can happen as well at our other fellow entities, right? Like if you're your own TOP. So the other thing that can happen as a result of this is over mitigation, right? We see something when we're looking at doing our studies, running our tools, and we see issues. We as RC West, our job is to protect the Western interconnection, right? We may say, hey, you need to manage this. We're seeing an issue. If we lose another asset, that you need to work on this and mitigate to not, to prevent that issue. And it may turn out because we had incorrect ICCP that the calculation wasn't correct, right? And therefore the studies may be inaccurate. So, so this could result in over mitigation due to this lack of visibility. So a similar concept that I like to think about the model and the calculation perspective, let's kind of switch over to real life a little bit. Google Maps, right? How many people, I'll just do a room hand raise, but feel free on the WebEx to do it too. How many people have Google Maps or Apple Maps on their phone? Yeah, like pretty much everybody. Andrew's lying. So, yeah, so I think most people, right, there's still a couple or a few that aren't using those, but it's a concept that I think we can all probably relate to, where you put in where you're trying to go, you want the best route possible, right? You might even have that option where you're trying to do the most efficient route, right? Most fuel efficient. So Google Maps is kind of like the tools that we're using, right? We have a physical model that gives us the roads, maybe the traffic patterns where we're adding this real-time data. So we create literally a model of streets and houses, destinations, whatever. Then we add all this real-time data, like the traffic conditions. There might be things like road closures, other things, right? People are checking in and putting, hey, a cop is here, whatever it is, right? So it's similar, right? We're creating a physical model of our transmission and generation system, and then we're adding real-time data to show some of the changes in that system. And so when we have stuff like, if you've ever been driving down, following your Google Maps, like happy and going along, and then you hit a road closure that's not actually calculated into your route, and then all of a sudden you're trying to find your other route to get there, and it's, you're going in circles because Google Maps doesn't actually know that that route is closed, right? This is an area where we're like, oh man, we really needed that data, right? And this is kind of like what we run into real time here without ICCP, right? We have an incorrect status, the market or the reliability tool doesn't know that that's what the status is. And we're kind of investigating as operators to figure out what that is, right? We're going into different sets, trying to figure it out, and then having to make changes, manual adjustments to correct it, right? So think about it like that. Real-time data matters, right? It helps the overall solution and the best optimal route. So I'll kind of move into the WEIM side of things, because for some of the folks on the phone, as you operate within the WEIM, there's a couple areas where it leads into some pitfalls, right? Or some challenges. So when there's no ICCP associated with a resource, or maybe it's bad ICCP or maybe inaccurate ICCP, this could, I think the biggest outcome, right, is usually we get an unexpected dispatch or a discrepancy in this calculation leading to deviation, right? So, and this could actually be real-time actual deviation, but because our solution is expecting something different, and telling you to do something different, it results in deviation. So a resource is inadvertently shown offline and incorrectly calculating balance for WEIM entity BA. So example, I have 100 megawatt BA, right? Or I have 100 megawatts online, but the market only sees 90 megawatts because 10 of those are not actually showing up in real time, right? We don't have that real time data saying, hey, this resource is at 10 and contributing to that 100 megawatt balance. So we may have a kind of incorrect balance visibility from the market when in reality we are actually balanced, right? This could lead to things like resource sufficiency evaluation, or RSE failures, saying, hey, I don't see you balanced, right? Based on your schedules, based on your current, we're not seeing the expected values that would show that you're balancing within your own BA and not leaning on the other WEIM entities. Or this could result in an inadvertent dispatch, right? Hey, I see you're short 10 megawatts. Let me bring up 10 more megawatts somewhere else, either by another resource or via your ETSR. So the next thing that could also potentially be experienced is an hourly. So if you don't have telemetry, sometimes we try to manage this by base schedules, right? And where this can run into issues is with those resources that might have a varying output, right? So this can happen during testing. This can be renewable resources. And what we'll do is when we have these base schedules doing that management, it really becomes a static value. So in real time, what we're seeing is not that change within the resource, right? We're seeing just a static value because we don't have a new real-time value saying this is what the resource is at. right? And again, I kind of point out those scenarios like when you're doing new resource testing, right? So another thing is lack of visibility to the real-time output in general can look like deviation. So, we say the market is thinking you're going to be at X value, but then you're actually showing that you're not at that value. I'll talk a little bit about when you do have ICCP, where ramp rate can have a similar effect, but lack of visibility in general, right? We talked about how it's, hey, I think you need 10 megawatts, because I don't see that 10 megawatts is there. So incorrect startup or shutdown. So we think the resource is offline when really it's online, or vice versa. It's online when really it's, in real life, it's offline, right? This kind of goes back to that topology piece, and it's really important to coordinate with your transmission, from a WEIM entity side, right? So not the SC, but the WEIM entity. Coordinating amongst the transmission is important, because if your topology is not correct, it could inadvertently, result in different dispatches for your resources. If the line doesn't show that it's in service, you may not be able to come online, because in this world where we're trying to create a current state analysis, we're not actually able to show that you're online until we make maybe a manual adjustment. ICCP allows, right, for that to be seen. Now, the last part is really, it could, two more. So false transmission congestion. So, right, we might see that, well, one, either a generation might not look like it's online and helping with that transmission congestion, or vice versa. We see some false transmission congestion due to some discrepancy in the data, and then we inadvertently move other generation, right, to accommodate, because we don't see this other set of gen on. There's also loss of capability potentially to certain functionality. If we don't have telemetry on the resource, we're not able to use telemetry following, right? We need to be able to see that resource through ICCP to allow for that telemetry following feature to be used. And same with persistent forecasting. If we can't see where the resource is from an output perspective for its particular variable resource, then we can't really, build on the persistence forecasting. Okay. So we talked again a little bit about how it can impact the RC side or the reliability coordinator side, and where it can impact in the market dispatch side. So what does that scenario look like in real time? Well, so in this case, from the reliability side, here's a scenario. The RC West maybe identifies an area of concern, right? And maybe the ICCP visibility is low. And so now they're kind of digging through the tools to see, do these flows look accurate? Is this, what I'm expecting? And they're calling maybe after or during the investigation, the transmission operator or gen operator to find out, and typically TOPs, right? So to find out, are these actual values? Are these what you're seeing on your side in real time? Because again, we may not have that visibility. So we're comparing these real-time values. We might be comparing inputs like WebOMS cards, things like that. Do we have the right rating in place, right? But it really comes back to, from a real-time flow perspective, are we seeing the same thing that's actually happening in real life? If we're unable to pinpoint, sometimes we have to take this conservative action to mitigate the concern, right? Because we don't want something like a broader issue happening. And again, this kind of leads to that over mitigation potentially, right? So then in the event of a manual replacement, so let's say we had an open breaker because we didn't have ICCP telling us that it was closed. We then go and close it manually within our system, and then it becomes a fixed status until we get an updated version, or until we get a call that lets us know it's removed. And then this could later result in the same above process where we're having to go back and forth, right? Different operators on shift, or those types of things to figure out what the issue really is. then the other thing that results in is reduced visibility to the overall monitoring again, right? We may not be getting updated current statuses. So on the WEIM side, could originate, you know, in a couple different ways, but here are just maybe this one at the SC side, right? We're wondering why we got the ADS dispatch that we got. Or maybe the WEIM entity says, well, this seems weird. I wasn't expecting that based on what I see in my real-time like view, right? So now the WEIM entity operator, whoever it is at the BA, is performing an investigation, right? They start digging into the different UIs that they have available to see what the solution is showing. And then they may call the RTMO. And oftentimes that is like a common occurrence, right, in real time, to work with the RTMO to dig into these things and actually really to see, well, what does the ISO see as some of these, right? Is there something on the ISO or on the WEIM side that you are seeing within your EMS that I'm not reflecting in real time on my side? So again, we kind of run into the same thing where if we have to manually replace or man rep a point, then it becomes static. And then we're relying on manual calls or things to change those. So these scenarios result usually in, you know, a few phone calls potentially, right, between multiple entities, and can be quite time consuming when we just are really like, we could have had the ICCP and better visibility, right? So this is impacting both the entity side and the market operator. Okay. So ICCP practice leading to positive reliability, coordination, and market visibility. So from planning perspective, you know, Andrew already touched on this, submitting your ICCP to the full network model process to be mapped within the Western interconnection model. So if we go back to that initial state physical model, right, this is the default. These are where our houses are. These are where our roads are, right? Making sure you get the ICCP connected within that part of the modeling phase. This allows us to replace some of those ICCPs if needed between the model builds, right? So as you're leading into energization, then if you provide updated or changed ICCP points for these, then we can, you know, replace those within a, you know, middle of the model builds change. So we don't have to wait until the next model build or 2 model builds to get that in. So when you're going into energization, providing those ICCPs at least 2 weeks, right, so we can get it into the update phase, then ensuring that the ICCP point readiness is good on your side. So if you have ICCP at your BA side, making sure that that's actually, you know, ready to go. And then as you start to actually energize, validating that it's good. And then ensuring, actually, this has been something that's happened to us before as well. We got the ICCP object IDs, which is awesome, but then we didn't actually have ability to read the ICCP. So if you coordinate facilitation of setting up ICCP, you know, there's a, you know, a protocol there to say these are the entities that can read my ICCP. In this case, making sure that we have the ability to read the ICCP object IDs that you give us, you know, that will help streamline the process. And then coordinating with your TOP to manage correct topology, and that if for some reason they didn't make ICCP available, and actually even if they do, making sure that they're coordinating via WebOMS for any new changes and things like that. So now this is one point I said I would talk about. So let's say you do have ICCP modeled, right? A number of you do have good ICCP practices in place. So let's say you have it modeled and ready to go, in which case, awesome. Here are some other areas to really make sure you align, particularly your GRDT, or, you know, we call it master file on our side, right? So those resource parameters as you get your resource ready. So managing your PMAX and your PMIN, firstly in the GRDT, and then eventually you could manage that PMAX and PMIN within WebOMS, but ensuring that they're accurate to what they can be in real time, and including the range that that is actually possible. So where I'm going with this is if you have a value that is outside of the range that you're sharing with us, that can cause issues, right? Because now the market is actually seeing that you're operating within a range that's not actually technically possible by the data that you gave it, right? So you told the market, I can't go beyond 100 megawatts. Now I'm showing 110 megawatts. It's now saying, oh, no, you're not supposed to be there, and trying to mitigate for that. So you could get dispatched to your PMIN. For batteries or BES, I guess a lot of people are saying BES these days. This could cause huge swings, right? Because your PMIN is actually negative. So you could be at your top of your battery output being swung down to your negative PMIN. So this is something to really consider as you're implementing your ICCP and aligning your generation to accurate parameters, right? Your ramp rate. If your ramp rate is different than your actual ramp rate, namely we're talking about if you're ramping slower in real time comparative to what you're providing in master file, the market is not necessarily seeing that you're making the dispatch that we were asking it to be, right? So the market solution predicted based on your ramp rate that you would go to a DOT of 10, but as you're ramping, because your ramp rate might be slower, it may only see you at 8. And it's saying, oh, well, you didn't make your last dispatch of 8 or 10. You're only at 8. And there's something wrong there. And it's actually showing up as deviation now, right? Because your DOT is 10, you're only showing up at 8 because your ramp rate is slower. So ensuring that you're actually operating the resource at the ramp rate that you've told the market you're going to operate at. So the AGC is namely where I've heard this has come into play. So if you have an AGC controller that's taking in the ADS dot or ADS dispatch, but then it's ramping on the AGC timing, that this is where the ramp rate could inadvertently show up differently, right? So just making sure that you're aligning that ramp rate from your AGC to the ramp rate that you're communicating to the market. Now, one reminder is you can adjust ramp rates within WebOMS, right? So you're not totally like hosed if you didn't have the same one in master file. Remember, you have these tools to help communicate real-time changes. For BES, another example of one that you may want to watch out for is ensuring that your SOC values and master file align, and again, within the range of the physical capability. Could lead to potential charge or discharge dispatches, right? So it might be trying to get you to charge more or discharge because it thinks you might be at a different value, or that your range and master file is a little bit different than when you're actually showing. So if I'm at 10, but my range says 12, well, then I may try to get you to go to 12, right? Or tell you, hey, keep charging. Sorry, that's probably not a great SOC value, but hopefully you get the point. So 3 areas that you might want to consider, or you should consider when you're creating your master file stuff or providing updated data, and what we might see in ICCP or in real-time data comparatively could, inadvertently result in like deviations or inadvertent dispatches. Okay. So before I move to this and hand it off, is there any questions?
I'm not seeing any questions in the room. Brenda, are there any questions online?
We do have Ali from NV Energy. Let's go ahead and unmute him.
Hi, I just have a quick question. That's a general question. I was wondering that for the resources that doesn't have any like the ICCP sent to KAISO for any reason. I know that the telemetry data is not provided for the market calculation. Let's say that these type of resources are the solar one non-participating type. How does the market just calculate the output for the RTD and RTPD? Is it just following the base schedule for the RTPD market, or the calculation is different?
Yeah, so it's basically just taking in your base schedule. And if we think about that point that I was talking about where you're stuck at a static value, right, versus this inter-hour change, right, that this can be a pitfall, right? So we're, for example, we may have a resource that's varying within 50 megawatt range, but your forecast is saying, nope, I'm at 100 megawatts the entire hour. So it could be inadvertently using that 100 megawatts for the calculation, but however, in certain intervals, it's giving more, in other intervals, it's giving less, and making up for the generation or backing down generation accordingly during the RTPD and the RTD intervals. Does that answer your question?
Can we go ahead and unmute Ali, Stacy? Thank you.
So we should expect it to see some value in RTPD market, right? Even though there is no ICCP connection or telemetry data.
I believe it would be coming from the base schedules if you have no telemetry.
Okay, so basically, if this resource, and basically it's the solar one, not the geothermal, and it's not under the telemetry following. So if there is no data popping up on the RTPD market, we should submit a city ticket, just follow up what's going on, right?
I'm not sure I fully understand your question. I think if you have challenges or issues you're experiencing, city ticket's always a great start. But I think what I'm hearing is that you want to use certain functionality, and so you're wondering if you need to submit a city ticket to do so. Is that?
Well, basically, I'm just need to confirm to see if any, I mean, for the resources like the solar resources that does have the base schedule in the market, but it doesn't have any telemetry data from the entity site sent to CAISO. These type of resources, should we expect it to see any data in the RTPD or no?
This is Sherry from the ISO. I'm the manager of market operations coordination. I'm the manager of the RTMO group. And I think to answer your question, Ali, if you have a forecast and you're submitting that as your base schedule, that is what you're going to see. You will not be able, if there's no telemetry values or ICCP, you will not be able to utilize telemetry following because there is no telemetry. And you wouldn't be able to take advantage of persistence because there's no telemetry to calculate where it wants to send you based on where you're currently at. You're just going to get a DOT of whatever your base schedule is.
So we get the DOT, but nothing on RTPD?
There's no persistence in RTPD to begin with, so I would assume that your RTPD dispatch is also going to be based on whatever your forecast or base schedule is.
So we do have the, let's say that we do have the forecast. So the 5 minute, 15 minutes solar forecaster companies send you the forecast. So there is no problem with the forecast. So we do have the forecast. We do have the base schedule. The only missing data is the telemetry data.
Yeah, so I think though in that scenario, right, the base schedules are at an hourly basis. So even if you're submitting your forecasts, they're at the hourly basis, right? Looking at my R2S for, yeah. So you're going to inherently have a challenge there, right? Because even if you have 5 minute and 15-minute good forecasts, we're only using, or we're only getting really this hourly based schedule. And in real time, we don't have that telemetry within the intervals to see that it's moving towards a different value.
Okay, so basically, does it mean that the RTPD market shows just follow the base schedule, or just show zero value for the output?
Yep, that's correct. But you know what, if you want to have further discussion on this, I would say go ahead and submit it to city ticket. And then your client rep or your account manager can help us set that up to have further discussions.
Okay, we'll do, but I mean, this is just a general question, not for the specific resources. My question is that if we do have the base schedule again, and we do have the forecast for 5 minute and 15 minute, the only missing data is the telemetry data sending from the EMS side of R to yours. Do we need to expect to see any data in RTPD or no, just zero value?
The data you'll see in RTPD, this is Sherry again, the data that you'll see in RTPD is the market making the assumption that you will be going to your either your base or your forecast.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Do we have more questions? No?
Seeing any further questions? Thank you.
Okay. So do we by chance have Jeff on the phone to talk about his or Portland's submission best practices or how they run really their ICCP submissions to the WEIM and RC West?
Yes, Jeff Power here from Portland General Electric.
Awesome. Thanks. So maybe I'll introduce or kick it off a little bit. So we have asked Portland to share some of their practices in terms of the ICCP submission. We could tell you all day long what we need or our perspective, but hopefully Portland can share a little bit about how they manage this on their side, kind of in accordance with that same timeline that we shared earlier. So to kick that off, Jeff Power from Portland General.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. If you can go ahead and advance the slide. Okay, this perspective on the ICCP timeline is from the EMS SCADA point of view. That's my specialty at Portland General Electric. And I have been with the company for around 20 some odd years. The first half was on the substation apparatus side, so I know what the equipment and all of the transmission equipment looks like. And the last 10 or so years has been working in the control center, configuring the database, keeping track of ICCP and all of that. So I do know that transmission lines just don't appear out of nowhere 2 weeks before energization. It's a long process with budget approvals. In the timeline, where things start to get interesting for me is at around 6 months out from that CAISO model actual when it goes into effect. And that's when the grid operations group, which is across the room for me, does a huge amount of work to put together the all of the future modelings for that upcoming model. And we chose to do double modeling. It is a bit more overhead as far as keeping track of things. And it's pretty much at that 6 month time period that our group finalizes our model and we produce the ICCP linkage from there. And as far as the ICCP object ideas, once we submit those for the upcoming model, we don't really change them. So they are pretty much all linked up good. From that 6 month period, close to the 1 month period is when we're performing the testing on those new points, and we bring in the balance of the non-BE. It's not BESS, my bad. It's a bulk electric system, not battery system. So we're testing everything, getting the displays ready. Time zero is when that model goes into effect. And it is often committed to the model before it is energized. And my fellows on the other side of the room, grid modeling, do all of the housekeeping there with getting the tickets and the outages ahead of time. When we achieve energization, we publish our ratings, we activate our new displays, and then the housekeeping once again to clear the outage tickets and everything's online. So that's pretty much it for PG's perspective on adding and modifying. If you can advance to the next slide, please. With all of this double modeling, we do have some of that extra housekeeping of clearing out those obsolete double modeled points. Usually we know about those ahead of time, right around 6 months before the model commits. We disconnect the telemetry, so we pretty much clear the RTU points, and we set up SCADA ADS so that the old points are pointed to the new energized points. The grid modeling group puts together the revised package deleting those points. The ICCP linkage for that new package is generated. It's submitted, it goes into effect, and before we clear out and delete those ICCP object IDs and SCADA points, our grid tech group, that's the group that I'm in, double checks with our modeling group, and we verify that things are clear of the model. And once we've verified it's clear, we go ahead and execute that job to delete the ICCP and SCADA points from the system, and everything goes flawlessly most of the time. I'd say one of the biggest problems that we've run into over the years is when the grid modeling group gets surprised by the project group and doesn't get looped in early enough, and then it's a last minute scramble to like try to get things together. But that's pretty much it. So I'm open for questions.
Not seeing any questions in the room. Brenda, are there any online?
No questions at this time. Thank you, Christina.
Okay, awesome. So thanks, Jeff, for sharing your process. And we hear you on that last minute surprise sometimes. We know that happens, and we're trying to help, accommodate in those circumstances when those happen. But we really appreciate seeing your view of how you get your ICCP ready in advance in accordance with the timelines, so that we can really have more of a streamlined implementation further down the road. So kind of leading in with that, I wanted to do a few minutes of roundtable, and maybe we'll just have a few short comments. Hopefully some folks either in the room or on the phone. What are some best practices that maybe your organization has implemented in your own process, right? So into your submittal process or even ICCP validation process with the WEIM or RC West. What are some things that maybe you've done on your side to kind of make sure you can, get this into the model or energize seamlessly? Does anybody have any comments here? Feel free to use the chat too. I guess we can read them out.
Not seeing any quite yet in the room. Are you seeing any online, Brenda?
No questions in the chat at this time.
It looks like one did just come in from Rory Desa. Could you read that one, Brenda?
Yes. He said TEP reviews future projects for the next year and plans out DB submission deadlines. Parentheses will continue.
Nice. That's awesome, right? So planning ahead, leveraging the schedule that we publish to kind of figure out when do I need to make sure that these resources are in the model, and then providing ICCP associated with that. Knowing that as you go through towards energization, we can update the ICCP closer to if it for some reason has to change, right? But that first initial mapping really helps us get that into the model, and therefore publishing to all of our tools. Awesome. Any other comments?
We did just get another comment from Rory Desa. Did you want to read that continuation, Brenda?
Yes. He said we use in process construction one lines, usually not final, but 60%. To determine where we expect measurements will be based on location of CTs and VTs. Parentheses will continue.
Nice. Yeah, so a really good example of, hey, I'm not really sure exactly that this is going to be where it's going to land at the end, right? But I'm going to do my best estimation of this is where I think the measurements will be and providing objects for those and then changing it accordingly later on if needed. Thanks. I think he's typing more. Why don't we have some CAISO NRI folks here? If you guys have any commentary, feel free to chime in. Meaning people that work a lot with CAISO new resources. Not our people. Don't feel put on the spot either, though. And I think I saw somebody from Nextera in here too. Okay. So while I think, oh, here we go.
Brenda, did you want to read that continuation we just received from Rory Desa?
Oh, yeah. We create ICCPs using dummy SCADA keys. The ICCPs will have real final names that will be used in the EIM for neighbors. The dummy keys are replaced internally with the real keys once we get the points list and have the real measurements. So we are able to match our RDFIDs to the CIM submissions well ahead and when the real measurements become available.
Yeah, that's awesome. So kind of giving you a way to have some what we call placeholder ICCPs or ICCPs that will be forthcoming, and then organizing that to be tied to your SIM through what we call the RDFID component. Awesome. We really appreciate that feedback from Tucson. And then Portland, again, thanks for sharing yours as well. I'm going to actually probably skip this question, but something to think about if we get together again, just because of the timing. But something to think about and maybe brainstorm with your fellow EIM or RC entities, right? If there's learned lessons that you've had, right? So if I didn't have ICCP, something I learned from it, and how I implemented something in the future afterwards to help streamline that experience afterwards. Something to think about for next time. So I just want to talk a little bit about moving forward. You know, we know that there's been some challenges, you know, with respect to the timelines and the environment availability. But what we do want to do is, while those long-term or longer discussions are happening, right, a lot more movement needs to happen, and it's tough to make quick moves on those things. We do want to make sure we're looking at the remainder part of the processes and documentation to see what short-term changes, support, improvements that we can do to help improve the experience for both you and us, right? So some things we're doing to explore enhancing the full network model scoping and validation process. So, you know, from Andrew's presentation, we learned about the scope. We gather all the changes that are happening within our full network model for a specific named database or full network model builds. And then we have a timeline where we're doing the validation internally to kind of make sure that the things are working as designed or as expected. So what we're looking at in terms of this is some external supported pre-full network model deployment checks. So what that means is we're actually investigating within ourselves, right, using that scope document or those scope items that you provided and doing some of our own checks to see that what we're expecting or what we were thinking about is actually there. So my team, which is grid user support, we're working really closely with the MPAI and NRI teams to kind of implement this for the WEIM and RC front. So these are things like making sure that we see ICCP within the resources themselves, right? So we see a new resource added, we're checking for ICCP. What this could actually, well, actually, let me talk about the next change first, or next one we're exploring. The other one we're exploring is, we create a scope, right? Saying, hey, in this model, we're going to change all these things, right? We just talked about that. We're talking about how can we maybe reach out to each of you to say, hey, based on our current plan, this is what we have for you. Is this what you were expecting, right? But again, the info there is only going to be as good as it is that you provided in that scope document. So in the scope document, that's where we're leveraging it. We'll say, hey, based on these, this is what we approved and what we're expecting to do. Is this what you were expecting as well? Or is this actually something that we need to relook at? The other thing we're looking at potentially doing or seeing how we might be able to implement it is after the model change, or as we're going through the testing phase, is, we have a change report that says this is what we changed in our model, working with the entities to say this is what we changed, review your changes for your particular area and confirm that based on the scope and based on the resulting changes that you agree this is what should be in here. I didn't put it on here, but we're also trying, well, I'll talk, I guess, maybe in the next one, but one thing we're also trying to do is, ask for a little more info as it relates to more details around these items. So you may see increased questions from our team, right? So if we don't have ICCP, you may get increased questions of, hey, are you providing ICCP for this, or can you provide ICCP for this? Or, hey, we're going to need to track something on our side that there's no ICCP and what we're going to do. The other thing that we're doing is considering like an energization pilot program, and this kind of exists a little bit today, where I think you can put in a request to have the ICCP validated, meaning we're not going to check for good quality data, right? Because the resource is not yet energized. But what we can do is go in, check the resource, make sure we see ICCP object IDs tied into the model, and that it's the object IDs that you're expecting. So being able to submit a formal request for us to do that between the grid user support and the MPAI team, will be working to see how we can do that. So as you may not be able to see some of this stuff in those environments, maybe we can help at least alleviate some of those validation steps. And then documentation improvements. An ICCP template is in development. So something that we've gotten feedback on and questions really is, what ICCP do I need to provide, right? So I know the market is going to use real-time telemetry. What are the ICCP points that I need? So there's an ICCP template in development, or almost, I think, done and about to be circulated. So we made some clarity on the points that are needed. And then we're providing these, what should we call it? So then it gives the opportunity for you to provide telemetry points with the associated model item, right? So we talked about RDFIDs, for example, and maybe the point name. This can help increase clarity in the scope request when you actually provide the scope request, and then allows our modeling team to directly know what they're trying to map, as opposed to having to search through. Oh, nice. So I see that we got a comment, but maybe after I'm wrapping up here, we can take a look at Jeff's brainstorm idea. So as a resource is leading to energize or sync with the grid for initial testing, again, we just want to reiterate that setup for resource testing. This is like the modeling. This is the market setup if you're going into WEIM. This is any notifications you might need to do for the RC West side, and making sure that you're submitting things like WebOMS cards, communicating within your own organization, right? So making sure your operators are ready. For the SC side, making sure that you have visibility of your resource, and are able to communicate with your BA really well on that. And then within ours too, right, to ensure that there's adequate visibility of the resources, to allow for best accurate views and actions taken, right? Send in those limitations and status points beforehand, before energization, such as in a WebOMS, and then actively monitor and manage your resource. So just repasting this here, there's that planning phase where we're really making sure that you're kicking off that process of getting it into our model and mapping that ICCP for visibility, and then leading into energization, kind of the readiness aspect as you move into implementing your new resource. Okay, so I think with that, questions, and then there was a comment from Jeff.
I'm not seeing any questions in the room. I can go ahead and read Jeff's brainstorming idea.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
So Jeff Power said, for model emergency issues, PGE has a dozen spare SCADA keys with existing ICCP linkages, which are ISO available. These can be quickly configured by PGE for right now model fixes without requiring major DB maintenance or system builds.
It's an interest, yeah. Thanks for sharing.
And we're not seeing any other questions.
Okay, well, thanks guys, appreciate it. I think you have just the wrap up after this, right?
Turn it over to Andrew Brown and Kelsey Ajax for some closing remarks.
All right, so I will try to be brief because I know I'm standing between you and your lunch. So we'll move along here. So basically, we've kind of been talking about a lot of the challenges we're facing and the improvements that we're trying to make. And one of the things we really want to emphasize is the opportunity for collaboration. And so we really appreciate Jeff from PG&E sharing how they handle the ICCP at their company. And we're sure that other people have excellent ways that they're handling it at their companies as well. And we really are interested in hearing about how, we're not thinking that the best practice is always going to come from us. So we want to hear the thoughts that other entities have on how we can improve. And we don't have to have like every idea right now, but we're looking for ways to improve. We recognize that we do not have the perfect system, and we're willing and working currently to improve that system. So one of the areas that we're looking at improving is RIMS, the improvements that we can have for RIMS. So we're moving the SCME process into RIMS. We're also going to be looking at doing some other improvements in RIMS. And so we realize that there's currently challenges with RIMS. Some of that is, with your WEIM onboarding process, having to submit your documents into multiple locations, it becomes confusing on, so was that approved? Was that accepted? Like, where are we at with that process? And it's confusing internally. We know it's confusing externally. And so we're trying to come up with ways that we can improve that visibility so that you can see what's submitted, what's accepted, basically where these projects are at. Along with that, moving items into RIMS, that's going to allow us to utilize more upfront validations. Currently, RIMS is at the end of its, the current framework that it's on is at its end of life. And so we'll be moving into a new framework, and that new framework is a more web form type. And so we'll be able to do validations right within the submittal. So when you're submitting your documentation, a lot of the more obvious mistakes that might be in there can be caught immediately when we're doing that validation. Some of those things is also moving the late scope submittal submission process into RIM so that it can be tracked. Currently, that's handled through email, and it can sometimes be confusing on, where is that late scope submission at currently. It's been accepted, but hasn't been approved yet. And some of the other items that we're looking at is we're looking at collecting feedback. If you're interested in providing any information on how we do the modeling submissions, how we do the scope submittals, basically ways that we can enhance our document collection process, for the entire footprint, so that everybody, kind of has an opportunity to state, this would be really helpful based on our processes and procedures we have at our own company. So that's one item with the with RIMS for improvements. And so one of the items we're going to be doing as well is asking for contacts. So currently we have in the RC portal, there's a contact matrix. And what we would like to do is have our own contact matrix, recognizing that not everybody is in the RC. And so being able to connect with the appropriate people, make them aware of if it's a production issue or we're having issues with either like RIM submittals or some other item, or market information we might want to have if we're going to have like a working group or a brainstorming session, like was kind of brought up here earlier, to be able to have the correct contacts for the correct people at each company. Right now, we kind of have some of the people that we know of who handle items, but it's really great when we can connect to the subject matter experts, and having a contact matrix will allow us to have that kind of greater collaboration. We promise we're not going to spam you with messages. It's just so that we have the correct contacts for the correct purposes. Because right now, I think we're kind of lacking in the visibility of maybe who some of the people are that do these specific functions within each of the companies that we work with. So getting that contacts, we think, will be very beneficial for all of us, especially as we look to make improvements and are looking for customer feedback. We'll be able to target the appropriate people for the brainstorming sessions or working groups that we might set up. If you are in RC West, you can update the RC portal by going to the contact list and then making sure that that's up to date. I think some entities, they get a reminder. I'm not sure how often it goes out to update that RC portal, but for some, I think it probably hasn't been updated since they did their onboarding. So it's something to keep in mind that contact list can be updated. So just kind of a wrap up, going through what we talked about. So again, the projects and processes, we covered the modeling, the metering, and the markets, basically how to do those submittals, what the SCME process is going to be like for metering submittals into RIMS. And then we also covered the market documents, getting to the operational challenges, and then best practices. So kind of the impacts of missing ICCP information, how that causes problems not only for the market, but for real-time operations. PG&E kind of sharing their process for how they generate those ICCP IDs as they work through the project timeline. And then also refining our documentation that we have and how we do like those validations. And then for the increasing our collaboration, we're looking to establish some RIMS upgrades, and part of that, we want to get some working groups that are going to provide feedback from the actual users that we'll be interacting with. Our main way of figuring out who to invite to those working groups is going to be through that contact matrix. And then we're going to be updating these slides with some helpful links once we get that Western EIM page updated. So that's kind of the wrap up there. Really appreciate all your participation. We have time for some questions, I think, before, if there's any last questions or anything.
I'm not seeing any questions in the room. Brenda, are you seeing any questions online before we wrap up?
I don't see any questions online, but I did go ahead and updated the chat where people can see that email and follow us on kaiso.com for those links. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Brenda. And so with that, we'd like to thank you all so much for joining today's meeting. As a reminder, this meeting was recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. All meeting materials and the video recording will be posted soon. And we look forward to seeing you in person and online during tomorrow's hybrid Kaisoni Resource Implementation Forum between 8:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. Pacific time. Thank you, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.